Hey everybody, Rosematter here. Welcome to part 22 of my Chaos Head Noah Let's Play. In the last episode, we got the first ending, Silent Sky, and now I'm going to be going after the Crying Sky ending. So I'm going to follow the guide for this, and if there is any new content, obviously I will show it. And I'll also briefly show like the choices to make to get to the ending. I will have a timestamp at some point if you just want to skip to the ending itself. But anyway, guys, let's go ahead and get the second ending. Okay, so here we are. First choice. I don't think this one makes a difference. Yeah, it just says I can choose it the way I want to. I can't remember what I picked last time. I think I said yes, because I believe one of my delusions had you in a swimsuit and glasses, I believe, so I'm going to say no this time. The competition swimsuits are definitely better than the regular school ones. I'll say no again. I really can't remember what I picked last time. Socks, too. They've got to be over the knee. I'll just say no again. Okay, what does he say here? Glasses, who cares about those? The school swimsuit is a symbol of youth, something to remind us of those days that bring such bittersweet tears to our eyes. Really, a swimsuit is all I need. Everything else is unnecessary. Slow down, man. You really like sunglass or swimsuits. This is hilarious now knowing like who I'm talking to, who Grimm actually is. This is so weird. It feels, yeah, like going back to the beginning and just like all of the progression, all of the character development that Takumi had is gone, as any man should, logically speaking. By the way, it's not really about how much skin is shown. Like, you know how a grill having her panties completely exposed is epic, but that the implication that she's going no pan is so much hotter, it's like that. Okay, so we do have a new tip, it looks like. Oh, okay, we got some new ones here. Oh, water lily. This is okay. I missed this last time. This was from the last episode. The shape of Takumi's D sword represents his pure soul. Its very long design, featuring no ornate decoration, signifies that Takumi, who until then had only been running away, had begun moving forward, risking his very existence. This edgeless sword severs everything in its path by vaporizing all it touches in an instant with tremendous heat. Over the knee socks, a type of sock that extends beyond the knee, not to be confused with knee socks, which when used in Japanese refers specifically to socks that reach up to but not past the knee. Over the knee socks serve as an intermediate option that reaches higher than knee socks but not quite as high as thigh highs, making the term an important distinction for both otaku and leg fetishes alike. No pan, short for no panties, used to refer to female characters who are not wearing underwear. Many artists enjoy illustrating a character in such a way that their underwear is not visible, invoking the delusion the character is not wearing panties. Alright, what kind of Nav can't acknowledge the superiority of implications? I mean, not gonna lie, I just like him naked. Does that make me a Nav? I don't know what Nav stands for, if I'm even saying that right. You stupid dumb fuck, you don't get moe at all. Well, your libido is deaf at full throttle today, but that's what makes you Nine-Hard. I should be disgusted, and yet. Damn, the nurse does a really good job at capturing the the speaking patterns of a horny teenage boy, I guess. Wait, go back. What do you mean that's what makes you you? I mean, yeah, I guess I went a bit crazy there. But I'm still trying to maintain a cool image for myself here. You cool? What are you laughing at? Anyway, what were we talking about before I went AFK? Okay, now we're gonna skip on ahead. And it's crazy, like, seeing this and knowing, like, who Grimm is, and I totally forgot about the fact that Grimm did show that picture of the person with all the stakes in them. Sunday, 3 a.m. at cafe. Despite it being the weekend, the sounds of someone tapping away at a keyboard echoed throughout the building, undeterred by the late hour. Sitting inside room 37 was a boy facing a computer monitor. The boy remained still and unmoving, and instead of sitting in the provided recliner, he sat in a wheelchair. Okay, I love this. So yeah, this is like the other side of everything. I like this. So we're already like from the very beginning, we're getting different sides to things. Okay, so this is Grimm showing the pictures of the crime scene. The boy finally stirred, ending his period of motionlessness. His eyes, hiding beneath his cap, pierced through the screen. A nearly inaudible whisper left his lips. So this is how we see like how he could be at the cafe and he's at his base at the same time, right? Okay, and like now it's all kind of like catching up here where it's like the thing about how he was like, oh, do I have like multiple personalities? Was I sleepwalking? When I was typing all that stuff up, but now we know that there is two of them. This is what I like about these types of games is like with each playthrough, you catch these little things and you get more information and it starts to make more sense. Once he would, and here's Shogun. Yeah, Shogun jumping in here. Once he was sure the user known as Grimm had exited the chat room, the boy began to take action, draping his wrinkled hands upon the keyboard. His mission was to get into contact with Neinhard, to warn him, and to strike fear into his heart. A distorted expression weakly crawled onto the boy's face. In that moment, his expression may have appeared pain to an outside observer, but in reality it was quite the opposite. The boy was smiling. He had contacted Neinhard, and Neinhard had responded. A casual conversation to most, but a miracle to him. I like how you can hear the difference between, like, Takumi and Shogun. Shogun, because he's, like, so frail, he types very slowly. His hand suddenly froze. An enigmatic whisper spoken as though it were directed toward Neinhard on the other side of the monitor. Returning to silence, he began typing once more, this time writing out a single mathematical formula. Oh my goodness, yeah, all of this stuff I didn't remember. Or, like, they brought it up later in the last playthrough. Formulas killed this world's possibilities. Like, yeah. Just keeps, yeah, putting in all of those images. I forgot how many of them there were. I wonder what would have happened if he just never opened those pictures. That's lesson number one when a stranger sends you links to pictures. Yeah, you gotta be careful with that. Neinhard failed to reply. From this, the boy deduced Neinhard must have clicked one of the links he had pasted again and again into the chat window. It might have been strenuous for Neinhard, but it was something that he had to show him at all costs.
怖いかい。でもだからこそ、君は目覚めることができるんだ。
Speaking those words to himself, he sent his final message. Whose eyes are those eyes? Without waiting for a response from Neinhard, he logged out of the chat room. A small sigh came from beyond the wall, followed by a light knocking sound. Signs that the occupant from the room beside him had stood up from their seat. And before long, the door to his cubicle, room 37, was opened. The girl didn't smile. Her expression remained grim as she took hold of the handles of his wheelchair. Alright, now we're gonna get to see Rimi, and then when she enters the picture to start talking to Takumi. His answer to the girl's question, which had been asked rather abruptly, was brief and concise. Still, being well attuned to the boy, the girl was able to sense a hint of tension in his tone.
何かあったの？西条匠に接触してきたのは僕だけじゃなかった。おそらく監視がついている。そっか。
She didn't speak another word. She simply pushed his wheelchair toward the front of the cafe in silence. Okay, so... let's see here. So we want neutral, which I don't think I've done a neutral one before. I would always choose a positive or a negative one. So we're gonna not pick anything. So this is him wanting to go to the crime scene.
で、次はタクがターゲットにされるんだ。死をもって罪を償え。みたいな。罪状はそうだな。引きこもってたからってことで。
僕は引きこもりじゃ。
Taking some offense at Misumi-kun's choice of words, I almost snapped back at him. But I quickly decided against it when I considered the possibility he might get upset at me. So I just bit my lip and turned away. And when I did, I noticed there was something written on the blackboard. At first, I didn't really care enough to read what was written there. My mind only registered the fact that something was written there and not what it was. But the longer I gazed at it, the more I realized something was wrong. Is it gonna say whose eyes are those eyes? Before I knew it, I was out of my chair.
ちょっとどいて。
おい、どうしたんだよ。
Yep, of course. I pushed Misumi-kun aside and rushed over to the blackboard. The instant I realized what it said, I felt my heart stop. Whose eyes are those eyes? Those were the words I said to myself whenever I felt God's gaze. Did, like, Rimi sneak in and write those? She hasn't been introduced yet, though, right? I'd never said them out loud before. Yeah, because we had to get to the crime scene. And when we got to the crime scene, we saw her covered in blood, and she's like, that was the first contact that we made. Although that was a delusion. I hadn't told anyone about them either. Not even Misumi-kun. It didn't matter how often I used it. There was no way anyone in this class could know about that phrase. So who? Why? How? I quickly... Then again, if he's a gigalomaniac, it could be like a shared delusion or something. Ugh. So many questions. I quickly turned around and scanned the room. The only person paying any attention to me was Misumi-kun. The rest were talking to their friends, reading manga, despite manga being against the rules, or sleeping on their desks. Then who? Who had written it? And when? Oh, okay. It's just a coincidence. Oh, I have to choose... Okay, hold on here. Because this is new. It says, you may additionally encounter new yes or no prompts tied to the... throughout the playthrough, we will use these in subsequent playthroughs to branch into heroine routes, but for the time being, answer no to all the prompts. Okay. So, I guess no? I'm making it up. It's all in my head. The NewGen killer is somewhere in the school. Whoever wrote this is trying to provoke me. I should definitely erase it. Had it been there the whole time, since before I'd even entered the classroom? I couldn't remember. It wasn't like I ever paid any attention to the blackboard anyway.
なあ、どうしたんだ?
Misumi-kun walked up to me, grabbed my shoulder, and gave me a good shake.
聞いてる? おーい、タク.
It didn't matter who'd written it. It had to be a coincidence. It must have just been a common phrase or something. It was just a stupid, pointless scribble. Yeah, that had to be it. I tried to convince myself of that, but it was still freaking me out. I still had no clue who had written it. I'd have to ask everyone in the class to figure that out, and I didn't have anywhere near that kind of courage. Immediately after I thought that, homeroom began and my teacher came in the room. His eyes immediately zeroed in on the words written on the board. With a quick, "Come on, who wrote this?" he grabbed the eraser and wiped them all away. Alright, so here we go. We've got the Yua delusion next. I believe this one we also want to stay neutral. But let's just double check that to see. Yes, neutral. Shocked, I took a step back. On the other side of the crosswalk, standing among the crowd waiting for the light to change, was the girl. And to make matters worse, the gaze beyond those glasses was clearly pointed straight at me. She didn't even try to look away. Her eyes were so intense, it was as if they were urging me to do something. I couldn't take my eyes off her either. It was like I was suffering from sleep paralysis. Suddenly, Girl A opened her mouth. She seemed like she was trying to say something, but everything else was so loud, there was no way I could hear what she was saying. I was completely entranced. All I could do was stare at the movements of her lips. Whose eyes are those eyes? A chill ran down my spine. There was no way she had just said that. It must have been my imagination. I sucked at lip reading anyway, so I'd probably just gotten it wrong. I shook my head, trying my hardest to look away from her. Either way, Girl A had definitely said something. Whatever it was incredibly creepy, especially considering the two of us had never met before. I needed to stay away from her. I should just run. I'll just run straight home. Run. As I looked around, Hazuki-san handed me a blank form, not really focusing all that hard. I took it from her and ran my eyes over it. It was a fill-in-the-blank style form.
それはあなたの心理状態を把握するためのチェックシートです。
Okay, this is the
心理テストのような
test.
ものね。それを
Okay.
書いてくれたら今日はもう帰っていいって先生が。
先生は。
ごめんなさい。ずっと診察が続いてて。来週まで様子を見て、まだ改善が見られないようならもう一度来てくださいって。
So I can't remember what choices I made in the last checklist, so I'm just gonna go random with this one. Then again, it wasn't like he was my primary physician or anything, I supposed. He'd probably just given Hazuki-san a bunch of directions to get me out of here. Well, I guess that means there was pretty much no point to me coming to the hospital today. I really wanted to ask Dr. Takashina about the someone that wasn't me controlling me. Whatever it meant, it was a really chilling symptom, so I didn't want to leave without getting an answer. That being said, I didn't have the courage to demand Hazuki-san bring him back to see me, especially when she already looked so apologetic. Reluctantly, I decided to give the test a try. I guess I'd write about my symptoms on the back of the sheet or something. If I did that, I should be able to get another examination scheduled for next week.
チェックシートは質問に対してイエスかノーかだけを答える簡単なものですから、当てはまる点があったらイエスにチェックしてくださいね。今後の西條さんの治療に対する参考にしますから、じっくり考えて答えてください。
Hazuki-san went out of her way to explain the procedure thoroughly. The test had some strange questions mixed in, ones you wouldn't normally expect to run into at a hospital. It really did seem like some sort of psychological test. Would they really be able to actually learn something from questions like these? Hazuki-san stared at me intently. She showed no signs of leaving, but it wasn't like she had nothing else to do or anything. It was more like she was monitoring, no, watching over me or something. I love these little hints of like, you understand now what this means given the context of who she is. My nervousness at being watched made it hard for me to think clearly, but I guess she was just doing her job. And then isn't the test is a Nozomi test, isn't it? Either way, I knew I ought to fill out the test quickly. Okay. Alright, so let's... I think I checked all... Yeah, there's Nozomi. I think I checked almost everything off. So now maybe what happens if I check off nothing? Yeah, I'm just gonna choose nothing. There.
はい、お疲れ様でした。
I'm perfectly normal. Hazuki-san thanked me as I answered the final question, despite the fact I hadn't said anything. I felt pretty embarrassed at being watched the whole time. My face was probably bright red. Because of that, I avoided looking at Hazuki-san when I handed her the test. There had been no time to write my symptoms on. I love that there's no time. I checked off nothing, but I guess I'd still have to read it,
それ
right?
では待合室でお待ちください。
I was kind of hoping she'd comment about like, oh, you didn't check off anything. Are you sure you understood what I was telling you?
お薬が出てますから。
Okay, so here we go. This is one that actually does make a difference to make sure we get the correct ending, so we want to have a positive delusion. I can't remember if I picked positive or negative last time. As she descended from the stage into the audience, I couldn't take my eyes off of her. What was going through her head, I wondered. The rest of the Phantasm members resumed playing, but Fez wasn't singing this time. She just wandered about in the middle of the crowd, and then she casually threw her jacket off, exposing her sexy shoulders. The previously quiet fans were getting excited once again. Everyone threw their fists in the air as they jumped up and down wildly. They made the ground shake so hard it felt like an earthquake. However, nobody laid a finger on Fez. Maybe they thought she was too holy of an existence to be touched. Normally, if a girl with her charisma dove into the crowd, it wouldn't be surprising if they got crushed to death. But it seemed Phantasm's herd of sheep had agreed to restrain themselves, all abiding by the unspoken rule of do not touch Fez. And in doing so, they could feel Fez's presence right in front of them. They could savor the fragrance of her sweat. They could touch the same air as Fez. And that was the greatest joy her followers could ever know. Until this point, I thought this was just like any other performance. But I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw what Fez did next. She casually began to unfasten the belt around her waist, and then she threw it into the crowd. All of her followers instantly reached for it, competing with one another to lay their claim over it. Then with a sidelong glance at them, Fez unzipped her miniskirt. Her skirt gently fell to her feet. Her black, sensual underwear was exposed. She seemed to not have a care in the world about her acolytes suddenly seeing her in such revealing clothing. Maybe she was high off the atmosphere of the venue, or maybe this was part of the performance, or maybe she was just an exhibitionist. I had no idea, but her utter eroticism kept my eyes glued to her all the same. Fez looked at me once more. Her lips formed a bewitching smile.
Oi, こっち来るぞ.
Fez's eyes were fixed on me, never once looking elsewhere. She slowly started approaching as if she had found her target. Then, when she finally arrived before my very eyes, as if I was her lover, she blew her sweet breath toward me and wrapped her arms around me. Her skin was slightly damp with sweat. The scent and warmth were so alluring they made me dizzy. Her breast pressed up against me, quickly and repeatedly rubbing up and down my body. I guess it's true what they say about singing being exhausting, because I could feel her ragged breath directly on my skin. Her arms were wrapped around my back, holding me close. Her nails were digging into the nape of my neck, and her thighs were twined around my leg. Shivers ran through my entire body like jolts of electricity. I wasn't able to push her aside, nor could I return her embrace. The only thing I could do was stand still, staring at her with my eyes wide in confusion. Her followers cheered again, but this time the noises they made sounded more like screams. The music played by Phantasm intensified. Chants of Fez echoed throughout the venue, and then shouts of do it, began to follow. Do it? Do what exactly? In a situation like this, what could they be talking about? I had no idea. Fez, meanwhile, just kept hugging me in silence. Seeking help, I looked for Misumi-kun's silhouette in the crowd. But when I found him, to my surprise, he was sharing an intense kiss with a girl in the crowd I'd never seen before. No, it wasn't just Misumi-kun. The rest of the acolytes, boys and girls alike, were throwing their clothes off, getting as naked as the day they were born. Some embraced one another, others placed their lips together, and some were even beginning to do the deed. Hell screams of pandemonium complemented the gluttony for carnal pleasure. Moans, groans, and the obscene sounds of flesh rubbing against flesh pervaded throughout the venue where Phantasm had just performed. This is a black mass. I finally realized this was an obscene feast hosted by the witch known as Fez. And more importantly, the sacrifice brought in for the witch today was me. I had been chosen as the partner for Fez. Was this really what a Phantasm concert was like? I was also beginning to lose myself in the atmosphere. I could feel a hazy mist engulfing my mind. I felt excitement toward what was to come, but also dread. I felt superior having been chosen by Fez, but also completely entranced by ecstasy. I thought I was going insane. Like time, the world had stopped completely. Fez's laughter reached my ears once more. Even in this flood of sound, I could hear her voice clear as day. What a sexy voice. Just hearing the sound of it put me on the verge of fainting. But Fez was seducing me into diving further and further into this melting pot of pleasure. Her teeth lightly sank into my earlobe. She let out a sigh right into my ear. And then, she whispered,
その目、誰の目?
Sitting in front of my PC, I'd gotten lost in another delusion of mine. The concert I'd gone to earlier today was great inspiration. After all, as far as 3D girls went, Fez was pretty nice. That said, the number of people in the crowd had been way too high. Hell would have to freeze over for me to go there again. I wanted to GTFO basically the entire time. Net slang, short for get the fuck out, an expletive used to tell someone to go away, or a phrase talking about leaving in general. Oh, the diagnostic results. You are not delusional in the slightest. Delusional synchro rate, 0%. All right. In the end, the size of the crowd made me too sick, so I had to rush to leave the venue. Today's delusion had been awesome, and who knows, maybe Phantasm and Fez actually did that kind of stuff. They just decided to skip today. Well, anyway, I guess I'll log into ESO or something. To me, ESO was my life. It was... Okay, I think I have done this one before, so with this one, you want the positive one. Okay, yeah, I have done this one before. Okay, I don't know what this one is reference to. Because I think I am in chapter 3 right now. So it says, at the base, looking at your monitor right before Rimi's first appearance. I'm thinking this is it, so we want positive for this one. Okay, when had I first started feeling the gaze, I'd long since forgotten. It slithered its way into each and every part of my life, bothering the shit out of me all the way. There were a lot of things that disturbed my peace, but the gaze was right up there with Nanami. It's the most irritating thing I had to deal with. Fine then, let's do it. The it'll take more than that to make me turn around game. Still fixated on my monitor, I try to think of some cool lines you'd hear in a manga. I can't remember if I did this one positive or negative. Oh wait, I have done this one. Okay, so this was Rimi showing up, yeah. Okay, so for this one, I think I chose the negative one last time? Or was it positive? I can't remember. We'll just go positive. Okay, yeah, so I've done this one already. Oh, hold on. Okay, so this one is different. Okay, and I believe it said to choose no for everything. Could she be here to help me? No. This transfer student must be a professional exorcist. She acts frail, but that's all it is, an act. She must be here to kill Rimi. The two of them should just kill each other.
たくみくん、私はここに殺すために来ました。悪魔を滅ぼします。
Even though the transfer student's eyes were welling with tears, they were also filled with determination. Despite her timid appearance, I felt like I could trust her. There was no doubt that from an outsider's perspective, her words were blatantly nonsensical. I was the only person in the sea of confused people who wasn't perplexed by her first words. In fact, I was screaming for joy, internally, of course. I'm saved. No doubt an exorcist organization sent this girl to dispose of Rimi. Fuck yeah, kill that bitch.
タク、騙されないで。
Rimi's panicked voice rang from behind me.
その転校生の狙いは私じゃない。タクだよ。その子の言う悪魔さん、惑わすのはやめなさい。あなたはここで終わりです。悪魔はあなたでしょ。
うるさいな。
Right now, I didn't care who the real demon was, nor who my real ally was.
僕はブラチューと演奏をして毎日を平穏に過ごせればそれでいいんだ。お前たちがどうなろうか知ったことじゃない。とりあえず二人で殺し合ってくれると助かる。で、相打ちで二人とも死亡ってエンディングを希望。
Following those words, I could feel a rising unease spread throughout the room. A transfer student whose name I didn't know, and a demon girl who had only been in this class since the day before yesterday, each glaring daggers at each other from their own separate corners of the room, the tension between them burning like a fuse trailing toward a pack of TNT. The homeroom teacher and the rest of the students were on the edge of their seats, watching intently as the events unfolded.
いいよ。タクの言う通りにしてあげる。私も異論はないです。殺してあげろ。暗殺者。あなたを殺します、悪魔さん。
And then they both sprang into action. Okay, so this is another one that is an important one to see. And this one you need negative. I think I picked negative in the first playthrough, but we'll see. Okay. So this is another one that's important to getting this ending. So this one we want to go neutral. Next thing I knew, my shoulders were being held down with such incredible force I couldn't even get up from the seat. Yua's cold gaze pierced through me at point-blank range. I couldn't help but look away, and my eyes fell onto the 3 Garo froggies attached to the bag she was carrying on her shoulder.
いい声を出さないで。
What do I do? What should I do? I tried desperately to think of a way out of this situation, but it was no use. I couldn't think clearly. She had taken me completely by surprise. My mind had gone completely blank.
昨日あなたの家に行ったんですけど、いませんでしたよね。夜まで待ってたんですけど。でも私を避けようとする西条くんの気持ちはよくわかります。私西条くんのこと騙してたわけだし。
If you acknowledge that, then just stay away from me. I have nothing to say to any of Shogun's underlings. Anyone who traps a weak person like me is a demon. Yua looked down once. She looked like she was hesitating to say something. But then after a moment, she very clearly said a single phrase.
その目、誰の目？知ってますよね。知らないなんて言わせません。ヴァンパイアのダイイングメッセージです。ネットで公表されたことで渋谷で大流行中の言葉。でも私流行る前から知ってました。ヴァンパイアより前にこの言葉を使っている人がいたから。将軍前に見せましたよね。ナイトハルト、西条くんと将軍のチャットログ。そこで将軍が書き込んでました。その目誰の目って。 そして
Yua inched her face closer and closer to mine. Her tone of voice was calm, but the eyes shining behind her glasses were ice cold. She was staring at me. I looked away.
将軍はあなたつまり
I mean, Yua was dead on, actually. She's pretty clever. In other words, what? Probably not in a way she could have ever predicted, but...
お願いです西条くんもう
That was when I noticed Yua's hands were trembling. Or was it just that my hands were shaking so much it made it look like hers were too? Okay, so this one is another one that we need to do, and I believe... And also, something I commented on, like when I played through the first time, was noticing the guy who's holding the signs just in the background sometimes. And even while I'm like fast forwarding through this, I do see him, and now knowing who that is. All these little things that you don't catch the first playthrough. So yeah, I did pick negative last time, so I should just be able to skip by this one. Oh no, apparently I didn't pick this one. Okay. I must have picked positive last time. I sat up and looked around the park once again. The man who had been sitting on a bench while staring at a cell phone was taking quick glances at me, or at least that was what it felt like. Right then, a man with a stern face entered the park and sat down on the pipe-ish fence, opened a newspaper, and started reading. In a dark place with next to no streetlights, a man, seemingly a businessman who had been walking quickly through the park, was now standing at the edge of the overpass, gazing down at the street below. The policeman who had been talking to the homeless man was now looking at me, while contacting someone on his police radio. Cold sweat crept down my back. No. Were these guys cops? Maybe they were tailing me. If that was true, I was completely surrounded. Yua had already made up her mind and decided I was a murderer. And then, based on her delusions, she'd probably gone and reported it to the police.
ふざけんな。
I couldn't help but mutter that out loud, albeit at a volume low enough so that no one could hear me. Was this another part of Shogun's evil plan? I didn't do it. I didn't kill anyone. I'm not the murderer. Why should I, a coward who couldn't talk to people worth shit, be treated like a murderer, and then subsequently chased by the police? Why did I have to get caught up in Yua's insane delusional bullshit? Regardless, I couldn't stay here. My chest still hadn't stopped pounding, and it hurt to breathe, but I still had to get out of here. I made my way over the overpass, trying my best to look as natural as possible. Right in front of me was a staircase leading down to Meijidori. I'd go down it, and then I'd escape using the road. As I reached the middle of the overpass, a new figure appeared on the stairs. I swear I've done this one already, but... Okay, here's another one that's important. We want positive. Here we go. I think I chose this one last time, positively. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay, this is a new one. I left the classroom and headed for the school entrance, refusing to let my eyes wander anywhere. Oh yeah, because I think in the negative one you see Shogun. As I made my way out, I stuck to my usual routine, walking as close to the wall as I could, all while keeping my head low so I wouldn't stand out. The final bell had already rung a little bit ago, so while the students on cleaning duty or doing club shit were still around, basically everyone who'd opted to go straight home already did. School always felt somewhat lonely or even wistful after the final bell rang. No matter where I went, it always felt that way, whether they were ancient buildings made of wood or newer structures like Sume. Well, not that I'd ever set foot in any wooden school buildings in anything other than Eroge. As I unconsciously walked through the corridor under the setting sun, my mind wandering around all sorts of inconsequential stuff, I spotted a strange figure coming toward me. It was a single girl waddling forward, carrying 2 large cardboard boxes. I couldn't see her face behind the boxes, and she probably couldn't see a thing in front of her. Someone was asking to eat shit. If this were in Eroge, this scenario would 100% result in us running into each other and me tripping a flag. I thought about attempting to do just that, but concluded it'd be best to keep it as just a thought. Because in reality, I didn't want to actually do it. Instead, my alarm bell started going off. There was a legitimate possibility that she was one of Shogun's assassins. Stay away from her, be extremely careful. I paid careful attention to each of her steps. She kept drawing nearer, sometimes tilting to the left or to the right. I, meanwhile, kept walking along the left wall of the corridor. As the girl started moving to her right, I sped up. We then passed each other without any issues. But right then I heard something fall, and I quickly turned my gaze downward without even thinking. Someone had dropped their student handbook. I stopped in my tracks. Had the girl with the boxes dropped it? As I stared at the student handbook, my thoughts began to wander. Doubt arose in my mind. Why had that student handbook fallen at that exact moment? It was way too conspicuous. It was practically begging to get picked up. Was it a trap? Had she dropped it on purpose? The girl had been carrying boxes with both hands. Her hands were occupied. If the student handbook had been in her skirt pocket, it would have been entirely impossible for her to take it out and drop it. However, I hadn't seen where it had fallen from. Maybe the girl had been holding it from the very beginning, hiding it beneath the boxes. I wasn't sure. It might not have been on purpose. The more realistic option was that it was just a coincidence. I followed the girl's figure with my eyes, or tried to anyway. At that precise moment, the girl took a turn down the hall and disappeared. I had only seen her for a split second. She hadn't looked like someone I knew. Her hair had been short, I think. No, maybe it had been long, actually. I couldn't say for sure which. Naturally, I hadn't seen her face either. When I'd passed her, it had been hidden behind the boxes. The student handbook and I were now all alone in the hallway. The sensible options probably were to either pick it up and deliver it to the staff room, or rush after the girl and ask her about it, but I was hesitant to carry out either. I looked around me. There were no other students in sight. I could somewhat make out the sound of girls laughing happily in the distance. It probably wasn't a trap. The handbook's owner had already left. How could this possibly end up being a trap? Could there be a small bomb inside the handbook? No, that was way too unrealistic. If I picked up the handbook right at the moment, nothing would happen. Yeah, nothing was going to happen. Just in case, I should check the handbook to see who the girl was. She could have been one of Shogun's underlings. I should check her name, class, and photo, then leave the handbook here. I couldn't be fucked to go after her and give it back. Nevertheless, I still carefully scanned the area, just to be sure no one was around. And after I was sure I was alone, I picked up the handbook and casually opened it to the first page. I hurriedly threw the handbook away. What was that? I'd never been so creeped out before. It was so unbelievably eerie. It didn't just scare me. I felt sick to my stomach. This was very clearly malicious, blatant harassment aimed specifically at me. Who would go so far as to do this? Wait, of course, it had to be the girl from before. That girl actually was Shogun's underling. She had to be. I'd only glanced at the student handbook, but all of the information that should have been on the first page, such as the name, the birth date, and the class, were blacked out. In addition, the portrait that should have been attached had been removed. I felt like I was going to puke. I was hit with an intense wave of nausea. I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. Covering my mouth, I moved toward the stairs. I ran through the courtyard with no destination in mind until I could no longer hold back the urge to vomit. The second I fell to my knees, the entire contents of my stomach began spilling out. Okay, this is another one. With this one, we want to do negative. Speak of the devil, there she was, passing right next to me. With a face that looked like she was about to cry, she bowed her head to me. Despite how uncomfortable I felt, I managed to nod back. I watched as she attempted to leave through the school gate, tripping over herself along the way. Once again, I thought about how small she was. She fit the lolly archetype to a T, and on top of that, she was a clumsy girl, too. I didn't know her very well, but her perfect blend of personalities made me want to shout from the rooftops. She was loaded with moe traits, and yet she didn't seem very popular with the other girls. What people valued in others really did differ between 2D and 3D, huh? So this one I think I've done already. This is where Rimi comes up behind me and, like, I hit her. Yeah. Oh, okay. This is new. This is new. Oh. Okay, so this, I mentioned this before about how, like, were they just playing like they didn't know each other because they're both like, this church, the Divine Light or whatever. Obviously, they both believe in it. Suwa and Hazuki suddenly went silent, then looked up at the ceiling. They then looked back down and stared at each other. Okay, after Suwa's... Oh! He did mention a girlfriend. Is she his girlfriend? After suicide, Hazuki's perplexed expression suddenly changed.
見られていたな。
Okay, that explains it. I was like, why are they acting, you know, like, had they met each other before?
その目誰の目ね。
Suddenly, an air of familiarity was injected into the words that the two exchanged. The sense that these two could not be anything other than old friends was loaded into their every word.
西條匠のオリジナルは見つかったか。
いいえ、この病院内にいることは分かっているのに。これ、カルテよ。彼は無遊病だわ。
In sharp contrast to how resistant she had been to hand it over before, Hazuki readily passed the medical record to Suwa. She had already had it in her possession, as if she somehow predicted Suwa would pay her a visit.
助かる。じゃあ予定通りにオーフロントに奴を誘導して覚醒させるか。
接触するの？
ああ、顔は隠すけどな。
Okay, right. Because the whole thing, he was dressed up like Darth Spider, right? Or Darth... That was his name, Darth Spider, and then Shogun himself is like, I'm not one to dress up. Yeah, there we go. With a mischievous smile, Suwa placed a gentle kiss on Hazuki's lips.
コスプレしてパーティーに出発だ。
All of these little hints about him saying like he had a girlfriend, his ringtone being the Darth Spider. Okay, so this one we want to just stay neutral. Why were they fixated on me? Esper boy. What the hell was that all about? Did any of them have any idea what had happened today? We'd gotten hit by a damn earthquake, a seismic intensity 5-1. Over 100 fucking people had died. So why? Why were each and every one of them? Why were they waiting there just to see an otaku freak like me make an ass of himself? It sounded like fans cheering from the bleachers at a soccer game, or maybe a volleyball game. The entirety of the DQNs who had gathered in Scramble Crossing had all begun chanting in unison. Maybe this was a planned part of the event, or maybe Shogun had mind-controlled them into doing it. They all followed the same rhythm as they raised their hands overhead and shouted the same words. They were all insane. I was horrified. The chant wasn't stopping. In the midst of their chant, I could hear the high-pitched voices of female DQNs. As I listened closely, I noticed the one thing they all had in common. They were all making fun of me. To them, they were just having fun and laughing to their heart's content. Everything was fine as long as they were having fun. A festival dedicated to my sacrifice. A true shit show. All I wanted to do was join in. Make fun of myself the way everyone else was. Every last one of them was a DQN. Nobody would be coming to my rescue. Everyone who'd come here wished for my death. Crowd psychology was going to kill me. Not out of hatred or fury, but simply because that was what everyone else wanted to see. Alright, so this one, we want to choose negative. Alright, why had I been brought here? If Hazuki-san was here, then that meant this was my normal hospital. It wasn't like me being brought to a general hospital was particularly weird, but something still didn't feel right. Why was Hazuki-san coming to check on me? That question really bothered me. I mean, Hazuki-san was a psychiatric nurse. If Hazuki-san was coming to check on me, didn't that mean the room I was in was also used by psychiatric patients?
警察の人が後でお話を聞きたいそうですよ。
え？
Hazuki's gentle tone turned cold. Without looking at me, she continued writing something on a piece of paper attached to a clipboard.
妹さんを殺すなんて、ひどい人ですね。
What had she just
あ
said?
なたの家で見つかったそうですよ。
Oh yeah, because last time she talked about how like, oh, your sister actually came to visit you. She's fine.
死体。
What?
妹さんの手首を切り落として持ち歩いていたなんて、まともじゃないわ。
僕は殺してない。
そう主張しているらしいですね。意味不明なことばかり言ってて話にならないって、刑事さんがぼやいてました。心神喪失で無罪。 ていうのを狙ってるんですか？
Alright, insanity, a state in which a person loses the ability to distinguish between right and wrong due to some form of mental disorder. According to paragraph 1 of Article 39 of the Japanese Penal Code, an act of insanity is not punishable, resulting in cases in which criminals are acquitted without being held legally responsible for their actions.
でもみんな思ってますよ。あなたが殺したんだって。
My chest squeezed tightly, and I began to hallucinate that everything before my eyes had gone completely black. I was starting to doubt myself. Had I killed Nanami? No, that couldn't be
こ
true.
の人殺し。
She had been writing something, but suddenly Hazuki's hand stopped. She then slowly turned the clipboard toward me. Alright, so this one we want to do negative, which I think I did last time? I can't remember. Oh no, I didn't. I did positive because she got all like flustered because I gave her the popsicle stick and then she got all cute.
私は自分の可能性を試しているだけだ。でも本心では欲しいって言ってるね。
あげますよ。僕、アイスはあんまり食べないし。
I'd said it with good intentions in mind, but Senna simply took one look at me before ignoring the offer. And then, for some reason, she handed me a popsicle stick instead. She made no attempt to explain herself either. I wasn't sure what she was expecting since I wasn't exactly going to get ecstatic over a losing popsicle stick that didn't even belong to me. Was she just silently ordering me to toss it in the trash can near the convenience store or something? Considering it was her and all, it certainly was in the realm of possibility. Senna must have had a whole host of meek male subjects that she used to do her dirty work. Ugh, she was pretty much insulting me to my face. But just the thought of what she'd do if I defied her scared me far too much, so I just bit my lip and put up with it.
私の勝ち。
Her gaze fixed on the sky that peeked between the buildings, Senna declared her supposed victory. With a sigh, I inadvertently looked down at the losing popsicle stick and gasped. What the hell was this? You can pretty much assume that any negative one especially is going to have whose eyes or those eyes at some point.
ただの当たりより価値がある。
Senna had a smug expression on her face as she explained. Was she just trying to brag?
だから私の勝ち。
What the hell kind of competition had she even won? And besides, I didn't want anything to do with these winning sticks, especially with how in poor taste they were. I was tempted to snap the stick right in half on the spot, but I swallowed back my anger and returned it to Senna. Okay. And this one, we want to do just neutral. The hospital room had an area of around 10 square meters. There was a toilet to the right of the entrance, and there was a bed near the back. The setting sun shone through the window on the other side of the room. Ayase wasn't in the bed. Based on how the sheets were a little messed up, it looked like she had been there until very recently.
どこ行ったんだ?
さあ。
The window was open. Wind blew against the white curtains, sending them fluttering in the breeze. For some odd reason, it had caught my eye ever since I'd come into the room. It felt like a negative delusion could start at any second. One where Ayase jumped from the rooftop and fell past that window, which is exactly what I got last time. One where if I looked down, I'd find her sprawled on the ground, covered in blood, with gray matter scattered everywhere. I had to check. I couldn't bear the burning curiosity. As if possessed, my shaky legs moved step by step toward the window. I stood right by it. The sky was dyed an evening glow. It was a crisp fall evening. What might have been below, the very picture of hell itself? With a gulp, I ever so slowly peeked out the window and down toward the ground. There was nothing out of the ordinary. I couldn't see Ayase's corpse anywhere. I guess I had just been paranoid, but when I went to retract my head in relief, I noticed it. On the window, 1 story below, a single towel was waving in the wind. I assume, even when I don't have a delusion, I still see whose eyes are those eyes everywhere. I assumed it was just a normal white towel, but words of some kind were scrawled on it in dark blue lettering. Due to it flopping in the wind, I couldn't quite figure out what it said. Not that I really cared. The words scribbled on some towels shouldn't have bothered me at all. But a part of me still tried desperately to read it. And when I looked closer, I saw... Whose eyes are those eyes? I was speechless. I couldn't look away. And right after... The towel was suddenly pulled back through the window, almost as if they had known I'd been looking at the towel at that very moment. No, that couldn't be possible. Nobody I knew could have been in the room below me. Is that Shogun's room? And he's just like, oh, he's looking. Okay, put the towel up there. Nobody I knew could have been in the room below me. Nobody I knew had been hospitalized. Even if someone other than a patient was stalking me from the room below, it would have been impossible. Oh, this is funny, actually, because... Oh, shit, I didn't think about that, because Rimi, she's like, oh, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I wonder if she was going to go see Shogun. And maybe that was Rimi herself that was waving that towel. Even if someone other than a patient were stalking me from the room below, it would have been impossible for them to predict I would peer down from here, right? There was no surveillance cameras in the rooms. It was all just a coincidence. It had to be. But what if maybe, just maybe, it wasn't? Okay, this one, we have to do negative, because before it was positive, I'm pretty sure. Because she, did that thing where she, bit my finger and whatever. Gladiol, I remembered that name. I'd seen that term back when I'd first been researching D-swords. It had seemed that D-sword was a term used in literature and pseudepigrapha relating to the legend of Gladiol, or more specifically, a sword in it. I wasn't really sure, though. As I continued to think, Misumi-kun quietly got up and started to walk toward me. He went to go right past me, but just before he did, he put his hand on my shoulder. With a sigh of exasperation, he made to leave the room. Ayase had finally said something to Misumi-kun, but she'd done so with a grim expression on her face. I wasn't sure why.
あ？なになに？俺の相手してくれんの？
ええ、そうね。あなたが邪神王の使いだということは分かっている。
What even? Another part of her insane storyline? Misumi-kun looked pretty annoyed at being dragged into Ayase's bullshit. A pretty justified response, to be honest. It wasn't even funny as a joke. However, Ayase seemed quite serious.
Takumi.
As she called my name, Ayase took out something that looked like a fruit knife from beneath the bedsheets, then threw it over to me. Surprised, I hurriedly went to catch it. While the knife fortunately had a guard on it, I still came close to cutting my hand. Him? When Ayase said that, she was looking at Misumi-kun. What kind of a batshit insane plot twist was this? Bewildered, I held the knife with a trembling hand.
おいおい、殺せときたか。いくらなんでも、それはひどくね？まあ、岸本に嫌われてんのは分かってたけどよ。まさか面と向かってそんなこと言われるとは思わなかったぜ。それで、なんだっけ？グラビトーン？邪神？何のことだか、俺にはさっぱりわかんねえんだけどな。たく、とりあえずナイフを置けよ。岸本の妄想に付き合うな。
妄想じゃないわ。匠、そいつの言葉を信じないで。
Misumi-kun's expression stiffened, and he took a step away from Ayase.
お前、異常だぜ。
匠、早く殺すのよ。でないとグラジオールに君の存在が筒抜けになってしまうわ。
With the knife in my hand, I slowly placed it back onto Ayase's lap.
匠、
君の言ってることはめちゃくちゃだよ。
She looked up at me with sad eyes. It doesn't matter how you look at me. How the hell do you expect me to kill Misumi-kun? This has nothing to do with Gladiol or whatever. Killing someone would make me a criminal, and that's not gonna happen. Simple as that.
さすが親友。お前なら。
Maybe she's gonna be like either... It's like, oh, Takumi, you're working with the black-hearted, so I'll kill you. Or she's like, all right, fine, I'll do it myself. Misumi-kun clapped his hand on my shoulder. And then, casually as could be, without a care in the world, he grasped the knife on Ayase's lap. Or that could happen. And then, without stopping even once, he removed the guard from the knife before immediately slashing outward. Blood spurted from her neck with blistering speed. Some splashed against my face. It was very, very hot. Ayase's eyes were wide with shock. She was looking straight at me. Her body then slowly collapsed upon the bed. The pure white sheets were stained crimson.
やっちまったな、タク。
Oh, okay.
今のが最後のチャンスだったんだぜ。グラジオール復活を阻止するための。な。
I couldn't even scream.
正しかったのは、岸本の方だったってわけだ。
As he said that, Misumi-kun got on top of Ayase's splayed-out body. Then, without even a hint of hesitation, he gouged out her eyeballs. And yet, her body didn't move. It didn't even twitch. Misumi-kun turned toward me, and with a cruel smile, he murmured,
その目誰の目?
Okay, so this one we want to pick positive, which I did last time. This is Nanami. And she's all better, right? Or we think she's all good.
開けないとひどいんだからね。おにー。
Okay. And this one, we want to choose neutral. Where is the person who's going to kill me, Sarah?
目の前。
This tremendous crowd on this cold autumn night. Just what kind of festival could make so many people gather here to the point of there being no room to breathe? Suddenly, the wall of people opened up before me like I was Moses from the Bible, a single path inviting me in. They were all waiting for one person, me. It's the reality TV show that's sweeping the nation. Today's episode, the world's most terrifying offline meet. People from all over the net have come to lynch the biggest embarrassment of all of Japan, Nishijo Takumi, right in the middle of Shibuya. Their catchphrase? Whose eyes are those eyes? Offline meet, when members of an internet community meet in real life. When that long scenario played out in my mind, oh, I found all the whose eyes are those eyes. Awesome. I laughed. As much as I hated pain, as long as I would die, I'd be more than willing to deal with that much.
僕が死ぬにはぴったりの祭りじゃないか。
I'd finally grasped what Seraton had meant by revenge. I hadn't died the last time I was here, so they'd prepared the stage just for me. Forming a lazy smile stemming from the corner of my mouth, I started making my way through the path between the people. At the end of it, I could see various members of the mass media standing next to each other like idiots, cameras and microphones in hand. Both the onlookers and the mass media were incredibly tense. There was a tiny bit of commotion, but nowhere near the amount you'd normally hear at a festival. All the energy they'd had back when I humiliated myself atop O-Front was gone. Everyone looked at me. Their eyes were cold and sharp, staring daggers at me with what felt close to murderous intent. Whether I liked it or not, my expectations were swelling higher and higher. Kill me, kill me, kill me. Alright, here we go. Finally, get to the new content. Shinsen Station of the Inokoshira line was one stop from Shibuya, with it taking only about a minute to arrive there by train. The station itself was situated within an underground tunnel, resulting in the only natural light being the beams seeping in from the opening at the end of the platform. Due to the earthquake, all the lights had gone out, enveloping the area in a far thicker darkness than usual. Carrying Orihara Kozue's body on her back, Aoi Sena set foot onto the platform. There had been no need to buy a ticket. Not a single staff member was present in the vicinity, and none of the ticket machines were in service. Only a glance was necessary to understand how horribly warped the railway tracks had become. It was no wonder the trains had suspended operation the day before. Kozue's breathing would turn laborious at times, but she was far from conscious. Dried blood was caked on her forehead. During the earthquake, she had been caught in the wake of a collapsing building and had not regained consciousness since. Oh, this is different. Okay, because before she just hurt her leg. Gigalomaniacs are unable to use their powers to heal wounds. The brain, pain is an inescapable reminder of reality. Thus, gigalomaniacs cannot form any sort of mutual recognition to the effect of, I'm not wounded, or the injury didn't happen. Human instinct would never allow it. Moreover, one cannot establish mutual recognition with someone who is unconscious. These reasons rendered Senna unable to assist Kozue. When they at last reached the deserted platform, Senna lowered Kozue from her back and gently laid her against the wall. Senna's expression was stiff. With only a single glance toward Kozue, she shifted her gaze back to the station premises. Glaring motionlessly at a certain point in the distance, she gritted her teeth. At the end of her gaze... Oh, this is very different. In the dark recesses of the platform, two figures stood shoulder to shoulder. One was a tall man wearing an expensive suit. His whole body exuded an aura of refinement. He had excellent posture, and a relaxed smile rested on his lips. The other was a homeless man clad in filthy rags. His hair was unkempt and shaggy, and his face was covered in stubble. The man's head was hung low, rendering his expression difficult to accurately discern. Their appearances contrasted violently. But the two men did nothing but stand silently on the dim, empty station platform. Senna felt nothing but raw hatred toward the both of them, Norose Genichi and Hatano Issei. Even if she wanted to forget about them, she would never be able to. A long time ago, her mother and her little sister had met their gruesome ends right before her eyes. And the people before her now were the very people who had killed them. With his head still hung low, the homeless man, Hatano, let out a desolate murmur. Hatano took a fleeting look at Norose's expression. Norose said nothing. His composed attitude remained unmoving. Senna's repugnance billowed as she listened to his words of repentance. It was the first time Norose had spoken.
君の家族が悲劇的な結末を迎えたのは私が指示した結果です。もう十分データは取れていたのでね。実に有意義な実験でした。
有意義?
Senna swiftly rebooted the D-sword she held in her hands. The resulting shockwave stirred her long black hair.
この男を殺せセナ。こいつが元凶だ。
言われなくても。
Senna had already kicked powerfully off the platform. Without brandishing her sword, she closed the distance, a phenomenal display of her explosive power. Her target, Norose Genichi. Well, we know that he's got abilities too. It's not going to be taken down that easily. She mowed him down with her D-sword. Even the air was torn to shreds. Norose's head tore free and flew away from its source. Senna followed it with her eyes, when suddenly, Norose's flying head distorted. I knew it. I knew that was going to happen. They keep doing the body switches. Like, I bet he's going to change into the dad. distorted mid-flight and transformed into that of her father's. Stunned, she looked at the headless body that stood before her. It had been wearing a suit only a moment ago, but now it donned the clothes of a homeless man. Devoid now of any and all power, it tumbled backward lifelessly. Eyes wide as could be, Senna looked at Hatano, who had been standing just beside it. He turned to face her in return, his bearded face warped into a vicious sneer, his face contorted as if a mosaic had been affixed to it, and his body contorted in a similar fashion. Oh, it's Suwa! The very next instant, Hatano took on the face of a man Senna did not recognize. Then again, who knows, maybe he'll transform into somebody else. His age, his face, his aura, they all differed greatly from her father's. Senna was overwhelmed with confusion. She took another unblinking look at the head she had just severed. After tracing an arc as it flew, it had splattered blood upon where it struck the concrete. It was her father's face. It was her father's head. Senna could not look away. So it seems like no matter what, we're going to end up maybe at the end at this station, and we're going to have to face Suwa. Because, like, yeah, Narose is not going to just show up and put himself in danger. So Suwa wants to kill Hatano. Like, that's just how it is. So he disguised himself as Narose to make Senna angry and then swapped out so that she would kill her father. An illusion made by a delusion. Realizing that, Senna's breathing grew shallow and ragged.
Sena-chan sa.
The man who was supposed to be her father, the man who is now completely different. Oh, wait, the man who was supposed to be her father, the man who is now a completely different person, yet spoke Senna's name in a far too friendly way. That threw me off for a second, the way it was worded. It was the result she had longed for all throughout these past 6 months. It should have been. It should have been, and yet, Senna was assailed by a fierce inner turmoil. Her father, who had been reduced to just a head, had his eyes trained directly on Senna. Still not comprehending why she was experiencing such psychological shock, Senna heard something tear deep inside her ears. I heard a voice, the scream of Senna's mind, a scream which cursed reality, a scream which emulated madness. I followed that cry all the way to Shinsen Station, but by the time I got there, it was already too late. When I set foot onto the dim platform, the faint smell of blood hung in the air. Kozupi was lying against the wall unconscious, and there on the platform was Senna, sunk to the ground with her back facing me. Her head was pointed down, and her long hair was covering her face. I couldn't see her expression. Right beside her was a headless body. It then occurred to me that the round object lying a few meters away was the head that had once been attached to it. It was Hatano-san. The moment I realized that, I bit my lip hard. A man was standing on the tracks. Contrasting heavily with the suit he was wearing, he had a rucksack on his back. A harsh mechanical noise was emanating from it. Suwa Mamoru, a detective from the Metropolitan Police Department's Investigation Division. This wasn't the first time I'd run into him, and I knew exactly what he had done.
Nishijo-kun, 君が自分から火に飛び込んできてくれて感謝感激っす。君を見かけたら捕まえろってことになってるんすよ。
誰に？
内緒っす。
He smiled a flippant smile, one that was somewhat reminiscent of Detective Bond's. But there was one key difference. Detective Bond's smile had always been just an act meant to throw people off or rile them up. When it came to Suwa, however, the sly smile was who he truly was. Okay, this is pretty much the same as the first time I played it.
あんたはNaroseの居場所を知ってる？
Nishijo-kunさ。
Suwa heaved a sigh as he shook his head in an exaggerated manner.
口の聞き方に気をつけてほしいっすね。自分の方が年上っすよ。
With my eyes still trained on Suwa, I cautiously jumped down from the platform and onto the tracks. Senna was still motionless, so I ended up effectively shielding her back.
アンっていう人を殺したのはあんただ。
だから
刑事のくせに人を殺すなんて。
君には言われたくないっす。
I gripped my D-sword
あん
tightly.
たみたいなやつに敬語を使う義理なんてないよ。
あのさ、お前に言われたくねえって言ってるんだよ。
Even from this distance, it was clear to see the smile on Sua's face had disappeared.
お前も人殺しだろ。違うとは言わせないぞ。お前は葉月志乃を殺した。俺は今すぐにでもお前をぶち殺したいんだよ。
Oh, okay, okay, alright. This is different, though. Now we know the connection between them, the fact that they were together. Hazuki Shino, the nurse who had been the real NewGen culprit. She and Suwa were both disciples of the Cosmic Church of the Divine Light. Was that all? I gulped audibly.
信仰の救いのためにそれは自制するが、その代わり。
So this adds a little bit of a dimension to why Suwa is like so angry at me. Not just because like he's insane, but he's got personal stakes in it. I was the one who caused Hazuki to kill herself.
俺が責任持って心を殺してやる。
I attempted to brandish my D-sword, but it was obvious I wouldn't be able to do anything. It was just a reflex. Just like I'd expected, I wasn't able to do anything at all. I found myself in a dimly lit room. In that room was a single man talking to another much older man through a large screen.
諏訪君、君と葉月君にやってもらいたい修行があるのだ。
はい、何なりと。
人を殺してもらいたい。
相手は誰ですか？
I could hear the difference in his voice, like, his acting voice, I guess, is like very casual, a little bit flippant. This one, he sounds very cold.
相手が何者かに意味はない。
と申しますと。
特に決まりはないと言っておこう。殺す対象、殺し方はこちらで指示する。我らが進めているプロジェクトノアを完成させるため、西条匠という少年に心理的揺さぶりをかける必要があるのだ。
揺さぶりですか？
恐怖を与えるのだ。しかしその少年の秘めた力は強大だ。直接的な行動はこちらの身に危険を及ぼしかねん。故に連続猟奇殺人事件を起こす。
たったそれだけのために殺人を。
不満かね？
シノもその修行に参加しなければなりませんか？
当然だ。
So he does seem...
信仰の理想郷を築くためであり、
Suwa at least seems to be a little bit
君たち
hesitant
に信仰の救いをもたらすだろう。
そういうことであれば。
時に葉月君はお腹に君の子を授かっていたな。予定日はいつかね？
あと2ヶ月ほどです。
Oh, I wonder how he feels about the fact that this guy told Hazuki to be like, yeah, basically cut out your own baby and kill it. I wonder how Suwa felt about that. If he was okay with it, or if he's like, it's part of the divine light, it's what they want, or if he had maybe some hesitation about his baby essentially being sacrificed.
その子供、
I guess we'll see in a
信仰の
bit.
救いのために捧げたまえ。
殺せとおっしゃいますか？
聖なる犠牲だよ。こう捧げれば、君と葉月君には大いなる信仰の救いがもたらされるだろう。
大いなる信仰の救い。かしこまりました。
Okay.
すべて教祖様の仰せのままに。
Maybe I was wrong.
きっとシノも喜びます。
I was thinking there might be a little bit of hesitation there, but he seemed almost more hesitant about killing people than he did about killing his own baby. I don't know how to read Suwa right now. Suddenly, an insanely powerful wind blew against me. It pushed me backward, hard, nearly knocking me over. I tried desperately to brace myself against it. However, my body didn't do what I asked. Instead, my body curled up into a ball on the spot. My body wouldn't listen to me. It moved by itself. It was like my body wasn't my own. Before I knew it, my surroundings had gone completely dark. When I looked below, I saw the nightscape spreading out before me. If I didn't know any better, I could have easily mistaken all the lights as a sky full of stars. I suddenly realized I was standing somewhere ridiculously high up. Oh, is this where the group dive happened? Beside me were 4 men and women I'd never met. Oh, I knew one of them, Yua. For some reason, though, she wasn't wearing her glasses yet. That's her sister. No, that wasn't Yua. It was Mia, Yua's younger twin sister, the one who should have died a month ago. Which meant this was the roof of Cornelius Tower. My body wasn't my own. I was wearing a school uniform I didn't recognize. Even the body type was brawnier than my own. And when I saw that there were 4 other people huddled together on the ground, wailing loudly as tears poured down their faces, it led me to guess what exactly was happening. This body that my consciousness had invaded belonged to one of the 5 victims who had died in the first NewGen case, the group dive. Through no will of my own, my field of vision, ever so slowly, panned over toward the helipad. Shogun had filmed the video, so he should have been here somewhere. There, Shogun was wearing a Darth Spider helmet on his head and a black cloak draped over his body. When Shogun had cornered me at O-Front, he'd been wearing something similar. But was this guy actually Shogun? No. His legs were slightly peeking out from his black cloak. He was very clearly wearing slacks. In addition, his legs were thick, like those of a healthy adult male's. They weren't the skinny, pathetic legs that belonged to Shogun. To Nishijo Takumi, no bones protruded from them. And when I looked closer, I realized even his sitting height was completely different. The cloak kept them hidden, but his shoulders also looked fairly broad. At the very least, the man wasn't Nishijo Takumi, and he wasn't carrying a video camera. Suddenly, from the darkness spreading out behind the fake Shogun, I heard footsteps, dragging footsteps, and not just one set of them. It wasn't a hallucination. The strange footsteps belonged to many, many people. There had to be several dozen unknown entities lurking in the darkness. The footsteps hadn't been in the video that had been uploaded on YouTube. Not to mention there shouldn't have been any way for this many people to have gained access to the helipad. And what the hell was the sound? The 4 others beside me continued to wail in grief. Through no will of my own, my body similarly let out a cry that began to tremble. Something was coming closer. If I were in a low-budget horror movie, these dragging footsteps would have been zombies. Zombies with both arms hanging down limply in front of them, their decaying bodies slowly swaying as they walked. But that was just in the movies. In reality, and especially in the 21st century Tokyo, there was no way a horde of zombies could possibly just show up like that. But if that were the case, then what were they? My heart felt like it was going to seize up in terror. I wanted to look away, but the owner of the body I'd invaded refused to do so. Finally, the unknown entities began to emerge from the darkness. They choked all remaining space on the helipad, sealing off our escape route. I wasn't sure if it was right to call it anticlimactic, but the ones who appeared were perfectly normal people. They wore suits, school uniforms, parkas, and they were different ages and sexes. But they were still all people you'd expect to find walking around Shibuya at night. Save for one thing, every one of the nearly 100 people there was gripping some sort of bladed object. None of them said a word, nor even tried to. All that could be heard was their raspy nasal breaths pooling together in an abysmal cacophony. For some reason, I couldn't see their expressions very well. It was like their faces were made of paint that had been blurred by water. Their faces were blurry and disfigured. Were their faces actually deformed, or was my sight itself the problem? I didn't know. They were sluggishly, yet steadily coming toward us. They were like robots that had been programmed with a single mission. I thought perhaps the fake Shogun was ordering them around, but that didn't seem to be the case. Every once in a while, he'd move his wheelchair forward slightly, only to freeze again and not move a single inch beyond that. 5 people had all been cornered, and now they had nowhere to run. In order to escape from the rooftop, they had no choice but to dive. Grasping their blades, the mob grew closer, closer and closer, little by little. Eventually, they were within reaching distance. And yet, even in these final moments, they all stayed completely silent. As well as this, even as they drew nearer and nearer, they didn't make any attempt to jump on any of the victims. But the strange behavior only served to make them all the more terrifying. Terrifying enough to make me think, I need to get out of here, even if it means I have to jump.
その目誰の目
I heard an unexpected voice, the voice of the real shogun, Nishijo Takumi. However, I hadn't heard it from the man wearing the Darth Spider helmet, but from overhead, and it seemed like I hadn't been the only one to hear it. As if they'd rehearsed it, the 5 cornered people all stood up, joined hands with one another, and looked up at the night sky. Naturally, only the starry sky spread across the night. Shogun was nowhere to be found. Mind reading.
その目誰の
My field of vision slowly panned, and then I saw something strange. Even though the nightscape should have been the only thing spreading out below me, I saw a long flight of stairs stretching downward. It led right to the roof of the adjacent building, not Sign City, which was across the Metropolitan Highway, but the building nestled up close to Cornelius Tower. A building nestled close to Cornelius Tower, a fact that didn't make any sense, because no such building existed in reality. Was this the building that they showed in the photos that Bond was showing? Even so, the 5 people held no suspicion the staircase was delusionary. All they thought about was how they had been saved by it. These thoughts, these emotions were conveyed distinctly to me, and then with only them in mind, they stepped forward. Hand in hand. They had yet to let go even once. It was exactly how the group dive had ended. None of them had possessed any desire to dive. So when the staircase they had been so convinced was real disappeared, the feeling of empty air deeply shocked them, and as they fell, they screamed from the deepest depths of their hearts, falling. Wind pressure violently assaulted my body. The shrieks of the girl next to me emulated howls of the most terrifying of beasts. She clutched my hand so tightly her nails dug into my flesh. The time it took for us to fall, those 180 meters, felt like an eternity. Dark earth rustled towards us with incredible speed. Our surroundings were so dark. I started to hallucinate about falling into a never-ending abyss, one that endlessly sucked me down deeper and deeper, and then... splat! The bodies of 5 people collided with the earth. With a sickening crunch, they were pulverized. The pain struck me without expecting it, a single blow that led straight to death. The impact felt like my entire body had exploded and been ground into a fine powder from the inside out. I felt the sensation of my heart violently contracting from the shock, and then my consciousness was severed. My eyes were forced open, and a new scene burst forth in front of me. I was walking down Tamagawa-dori. My body was completely intact, yet the sensation of crashing into the ground remained distinct. It's like that feeling when you have like a falling dream and it jerks you awake. It's the worst. Except this is like 100 times worse. Through no will of my own, I was walking down the street as if I were any other... Oh, are we going through each of the murders? The second one... Was it the guy who got the baby sewn up in him? Or was that another murder? I can't remember. So maybe we're going through each of the murder victims. This body was more in shape than my own. This wasn't me. I had a terrible feeling about this. Suddenly I noticed a strange man walking toward me. When I saw him, I was forced to acknowledge my terrible feeling had been warranted. The man passed me. He was wearing a fairly normal suit, but on his head he had a Darth Spider helmet. It was all too surreal. There wasn't anyone else around. I wanted to run away as soon as possible. And yet, despite my wishes, the owner of the body my consciousness had invaded looked over their shoulder at the man he had just passed. Darth Spider was right behind me. He was so close I could almost feel his breath. And then, bursting out of my blind spot, his fist flew straight into my stomach. And we're going to wake up on the operating table. All the strength left my body and my vision went black. Not long after I lost consciousness, I began to feel an intense, searing pain spreading throughout my abdomen. When I opened my eyes, I was in an operating room. Wearing only white scrubs, Hazuki Shino was standing in front of me. Her scrubs were wide open, revealing her bloodied abdomen. Even though her face was a sickly pale, she looked at me with a gentle smile. In her hand was a scalpel she slowly laid against my stomach. She applied some pressure, and with a slight ripping sound, a small incision appeared on my skin. Blood spurted from the wound, dancing through the air before landing on Hazuki Shino's face. And yet, despite that, the same bright smile stayed plastered on her face. I watched in horror and pain as she slowly sliced me open. I had seen this scene once before, back when I had read Hazuki's memories. The man-child case. The pain in my stomach was becoming unbearable. Screaming and sobbing, I tried to escape somehow by thrashing around, but my limbs were all fastened to the bed. I was unable to move. Any movement would lead to the pain in my abdomen growing far more intense.
信仰の救いをあなたに。
With her hand resting upon my cleanly sliced open skin, Hazuki began poking around in the gushing wound with her fingers. That alone pierced me with enough agony to shatter my mind. I could very clearly feel the sensation of her fingers writhing around inside me. And then, just as I had seen in her memories, Hazuki forcibly widened the wound from both sides. The sensation of skin and flesh tearing. The lack of anesthesia left the pain raw and unfiltered, causing me, along with the owner of the body, to lose consciousness, only to be woken up immediately after by the overwhelming pain. But Hazuki kept forcibly widening the wound all the same. The details no longer mattered to me, such as where it hurt, or where specifically on my body the pain was erupting from. I hallucinated all my nerve endings being pierced with searing hot needles. I passed out again, but I couldn't escape. Pain mercilessly forced my consciousness back awake. I let my body writhe in pain. I found myself thinking if it would release me from the suffering, I would be willing to bite my tongue off. But just as I thought that, I saw something. There in Hazuki's hand was a blood-soaked fetus. Something that served only to make her smile all the more revolting. This woman was well and truly insane. She took the corpse of the fetus she had removed from her own body, and then plunged it deep inside my abdomen. Her hand and the fetus she was gripping tightly in it shoved aside my organs, gouged out my flesh, and gnawed deeper and deeper into me. I began to vomit blood, but even though it threatened to suffocate me, gargling screams rose from my drowning throat without end. Perhaps due to the pain overloading my brain, my head felt strangely foggy, and yet, despite the fogginess, the pain refused to get any more bearable, and I began to comprehend less and less of what was happening. Pain was all that ruled my mind. Hazuki then withdrew her hand from my stomach and nodded in satisfaction. And as if attending to a patient, she spoke a few soft words. But the very second she finished speaking, she suddenly lost consciousness and her body collapsed to the floor. At around the same time, someone else entered the operating room. The sound of his shoes reverberated throughout it, but I had no interest in whoever it was. The sole thing I focused on was continuing my bawling and screaming, unable to feel anything but agony. Seeing the unnatural expansion of my stomach, I fell into a panic. Along with the pain, I began to feel an itchiness. It was itchy, really, really itchy. I wanted to scratch it, but my hands were tied to the bed, so I couldn't. Suddenly, a shadow obstructed my view. It was Darth Spider, appearing from almost nowhere. He picked up Hazuki in his arms, exited the operating room with her, then came back alone a few moments later. He was carrying a sewing needle and some nylon thread. What was he thinking? I didn't know until he slowly began to stitch together the wound on my stomach. The pain was practically nothing compared to the pain of having a foreign object shoved inside me, nor the agony of having my flesh ripped open. Darth Spider's sewing was incredibly sloppy. Even a grade schooler could have done better. Every time he pulled at the fishing line, it chafed against the chasms he had opened in my skin. The itchiness grew more intense. An unbearable itchiness. An itchiness that seemed to well up from deep inside me. Itchy, itchy, itchy. I'm thinking about like the Resident Evil itchy, itchy, tasty. I wanted to scratch it. If he just let me, I wouldn't even mind if I died. The tingling itch combined with the pain, and yet even more than the pain, The itch threatened to drive me completely insane. Due to my mental state, it took me a while to notice the scenery had changed once again. I felt slight relief from the pain and the itchiness, but the sensation hadn't completely disappeared. Even now, as I stumbled through Shinsen, I felt an itch in the center of my body, but along with that itch, I felt the sensation of a foreign object in my abdomen, as well as the pain of a needle weaving in and out of my body. They all remained as distinct, lingering discomforts, continuing to torment my mind even now. I was on an unlit, rarely used road. As I walked down it, I saw a figure coming toward me. The road was so narrow we would have had to turn sideways in order to even pass each other. But when I saw what the figure looked like, my body turned to ice. Yet again, it was the man dressed as Darth Spider. Man, we are going through each and every one of these, aren't we? There's a few of them. We passed each other. Darth Spider didn't give any kind of reaction. My heart was beating out of my chest. And then something surfaced in my mind. An incredibly compulsive urge. One that made no sense for me to feel. Crusty old fuck had been hitting on my girl. Pissed me off like you wouldn't believe. I wanted to kill him. That extremely abrupt feeling drove me forward. The face of my girl was foggy in my memories. I couldn't remember her very well, to the point where I wasn't sure if she even existed in the first place. And yet, the crusty old fuck who'd been hitting on my girl was crystal clear in my mind. Oh shit. Okay, this is because we never found out about the crucifixion one. I was like, okay, so Suwa killed this guy because he thought he was hitting on the nurse? I'd seen his face before. He was the victim of the crucifixion case. Because, like, yeah, with the crucifixion one, that one was very mysterious. Like, we didn't know who the guy was or, like, why he was targeted. My memory launched forward, placing me in a dark, narrow alley. And right in front of me was the victim of that case. He was a middle-aged man, and my hands were wrapped tightly around his neck. His body convulsed violently, bubbles frothed from his mouth, and his eyes rolled into the back of his head. Upon learning what it felt like to have someone's life disappear in my hands, I went slightly cold. Eventually, the man stopped moving. When Komaeda, the perpetrator of this case, confirmed he was dead, I released my hands from his neck and let him collapse to the ground. Wait, Komaeda, the perpetrator of the case. I gave him a single parting kick in the side, and immediately went to leave. I heard a voice, and when I turned around, the man who was supposed to be dead was getting up. Eyes still rolled into the back of his head, and then he reached for me. With a yelp, I punched him, knocking him to the ground. But even though his movements were sluggish, he kept getting back up no matter how many times I hit him. I grabbed his neck again. Just as I'd done earlier, but this time with even more force, I wrung my hands tightly around his neck. I put all the strength I had into my grip, applying enough pressure to snap the bones in his neck. He soon stopped moving again. This time, I put my ear up to his mouth. Once I made absolutely sure he wasn't breathing, I let him drop. I watched his body for a while. And then somehow, the man who should have died twitched violently and began rising back to his feet. The expression on his face was one clearly fitting of a dead man's, and it didn't change even slightly as he moved. Rising up from the ground, he started coming toward me. As I stumbled back in fear, I stepped on something. Startled, I looked down at my feet. A large number of cross-shaped stakes were scattered across the street. I had to stop him from moving anymore. I had to drive a stake into the monster I was facing. If I didn't, I'd be screwed. Overwhelmed by the impending danger, I shoved the man against the wall before he could finish getting up. I picked up a stake. And before I knew it, I was gripping a hammer in my other hand. Once again, I found myself in an operating room, but it wasn't the man-child case again. Despite knowing that, the pain from the experience, coupled with the sensation of a foreign object in my stomach, continued to torture me. It ground away at my each and every nerve ending. I could see two figures in my field of vision. They were both still as could be, staring in my direction with bated breath. One of them was Darth Spider, and the other was Hazuki Shino. Her scrubs weren't soaked in blood this time, which was what led me to believe this was a different case than the man-child one. I was lying in a bed, and a needle for an IV was embedded into my arm. However, nothing was being injected into me. The liquid in the tube was flowing backward, and the liquid was blood. Oh, this is the vampire? So that's interesting. So what happened... Okay, anyway, I'll say later. The blood that circulated within the body was being sucked into the IV. At the end of the tube, there was only an extremely dirty bucket. It was filled to the brim with blood. The blood continued to fall into the bucket. Drip, drip, drip. My head felt fuzzy. I was incredibly dizzy. I was assailed by an intensely peculiar sensation, one where a pleasant feeling, like my consciousness, was floating far away. Intermixed with the pain and itchiness left over, then as if showing off to me. Darth Spider and Hazuki tenderly embraced each other like lovers. As the two supported one another, Hazuki's face couldn't have looked happier. I couldn't understand how she could make a face like that. While in the middle of creating the dried-up corpse from the vampire case. But before I could think about why I couldn't understand it, the pain grew far more intense. My throat was sapped of all moisture, my vision gradually darkened, and my consciousness slowly grew thinner and thinner, until it eventually evaporated completely. I then realized this was a vicarious experience. I was being forced to experience the series of NewGen murders vicariously. I was facing the pain of each case. The fear, one by one. So, like I was saying before, the text just started to go off on its own. So interesting with the crucifixion case, when they said, I assumed that it was Suwa that did it, but apparently it was like some completely different guy. Or maybe it was Suwa. They said something about like the name started with K. But I have to assume that that was Suwa. That I'm a little confused about that. Like I assumed that he was the one who was behind all the murders, him and Hazuki. But it seemed like the name was like a completely different guy. But anyway, if that was true, then there were still 3 remaining. Realizing that, my despair pulled me down even deeper. So there's the psychiatrist. Then there's the 3 guys that got hung up. The ones that were targeting Takumi and beat him up. What was the other case? Oh yeah, the one with the girl who got her hand fed to her, and we were all like, is that Nanami's hand?
Sensei.
Someone called out to me, and I came back to myself. I should have been in the operating room, but I was standing in the hallway of some hospital.
Takashina sensei.
That's it, Dr. Takashina. Unsurprisingly, through no will of my own, my body turned around. Behind me was Hazuki Shino, accompanied by a somewhat somber expression.
折り入ってご相談があるんですが、ここだと人目につきますから、こっちに。
Her voice apologetic, Hazuki entered an examination room. My mind screamed, "Don't go," at Dr. Takashina, but unsurprisingly, my voice didn't reach him. It was currently after hours. It was currently after hours at the hospital, so no one else was in the exam room. Hazuki walked steadily toward the center of it. I, Dr. Takashina, followed her without even the slightest doubt. And then she abruptly stopped. Just as I wondered what she was doing, a man wearing something black on his head leapt out from the darkness. I reeled back, startled, only for the man to shove something akin to a piece of gauze over my mouth. And just like that, my consciousness was stolen away. An ear-piercing noise rang through my head. My skull was vibrating violently. Oh, those sound effects, though. But it wasn't just vibrating. It was being shaved to dust. I felt that sensation incredibly clearly. That's hurting my teeth. It just makes me think of, like, going to the dentist. Except it's your skull instead. The sound died down, and when I opened my eyes, I was in the operating room once again. Like a collection of numerous eyes, many lights bore down on me from the ceiling. Do we really have to go into detail about this one again? They shone down on me brilliantly, illuminating my face.
頭蓋骨が外れましたよ、先生。まあ、先生の硬膜、とても綺麗だわ。
In a thoroughly enchanted tone, Hazuki said those words, picked up a pair of scissors, and used them to cut away the solid membrane covering my brain. I felt the sensation directly, and immediately following it, I was seized by a sickening, almost frustrating feeling. I, or rather Dr. Takashina, hadn't known Hazuki had the ability to perform surgery, let alone open brain surgery. As a result of this, my mind erupted with surprise, followed by me noticing my body was incapable of moving due to the anesthesia. Hazuki wasn't alone in the operating room. The man wearing black from before, Darth Spider, was there too. But he said nothing. He simply stood in place, not moving a muscle.
人は脳死状態でも人工呼吸器なしで1週間以上生きたっていう事例があるんです。ご存知ですか？
Without losing the gentle smile on her face, Hazuki whispered something strange in my ear.
それってつまり、脳がなくてもしばらくは生きていられるっていうことですよね。先生はどれくらい生きられるかしら？
I shuddered, and an unfathomable terror rose up from within me. Hazuki held a spoon in front of my eyes, only for it to leave my vision soon after.
高階先生に信仰の救いあれ。
Without warning, I felt a foreign object being forced into me inside my head. And not inside my head in the sense it wasn't really happening. Something had literally been forced inside my head. I felt the sensation of something entering me, then moving around. There was no pain. However, it was more than enough to fill me with disgust and terror. Hazuki shook off a piece of something onto a tray sitting beside me. Only moving my eyes, I looked over to try and see what it was. It was a beautiful pink color, but it had been smashed into a pulp. It reminded me of a soft salmon roe. Realizing it was my brain, my sense of dread peaked. I pleaded with her, "Please stop." But Hazuki's hand didn't stop moving. Instead, her expression turned to one of pure ecstasy. Her cheeks were stained a bright scarlet as she carelessly dug through my, Dr. Takashina's brain, taking more of it with every scoop. Suddenly, I was having fun. I wanted to laugh. Suddenly, I harbored an intense hatred. Suddenly, I felt happy. Suddenly, a furious lust burned within me, rising up and constricting my chest. She stirred my brain, stirring my emotions along with it. Okay, at least there's only a couple more of these to go. Emotions different to what I myself felt boiled up within me. Because of these emotions, my mind, heart, and soul were drifting away from the consciousness known as me, forcing me to confront the ambiguity of my own existence. As the mental rape that sought to deny my own existence tore my mind to shreds, I found myself walking under a railway overpass. If I went off the case order this time, it would be the finger food case. As I'd expected would happen, my body was now a woman's. I was incredibly hungry. Perhaps the victim had been on a diet or something. I crossed paths with the man in the Darth Spider costume once again. Everywhere I went, he would show up. Considering how much his appearance stood out, why hadn't the police or mass media gotten anything on him at all? It was the first time Darth Spider had said anything. He pointed at my right hand as he spoke. It was a surreal spectacle. For some reason, I was holding 5 bare chicken skewers, each one sticking out from the gaps between my fingers. Warm-looking steam rose from them, as did the juicy aroma of cooked meat. Both things further stimulated my appetite. Saliva overflowed from my mouth. Unable to wait another second, I took a bite. A sharp pain shot through my finger, but I couldn't stop chewing. I had never had such incredible, delicious chicken in my entire life. Oh, God, the sound effects, man. Tons of juice escaped. Oh, it was delectable. It was to die for. In the blink of an eye, I had cleaned the skewers completely. Before I knew it, Darth Spider had disappeared. But it didn't matter much to me. I didn't even care about this strange man. I wanted to keep eating. My stomach cried out for more food. The fingers on my right hand throbbed with pain, but my hunger easily overrode it. Once again, I looked at my right hand, and that was when I realized I hadn't just been holding chicken skewers. I had also been carrying a large slab of meat. The glorious protein was still fastened to the bone, with its dripping juices staining the sleeves of my blouse a dark shade of red. When had I gotten my hands on this? How long had I had it for? That question too quickly became unimportant. I sank my teeth into the meat with all the strength I could muster. Excruciating pain. I ripped a chunk off. Chewed it. Tasted it. Then gulped it down. The meat was tender and it carried a fair amount of fat. I bit deeper. Both my hands and the area around my mouth were greasy with fat, but I didn't care. I'd never experienced such incredible flavor before. I tore the meat off the bone. Fat melted and gushed throughout my mouth, leaving a unique aftertaste. It hurt. For some reason it hurt so bad I thought I would die, but I kept chewing. Compared to how large the bone was, there wasn't a lot of meat on it. It didn't take long for me to eat it all up. Finally, I licked off all the remaining tiny scraps of flesh that were left clinging to the bone. Every piece I set free I suckled on, savoring the taste of meat and bone. The 5 slender bones protruding from the ends weren't too hard. If I wanted to, I could bite them off without much trouble. I gnawed on the bones. A fierce pain ripped through me, a pain so intense I nearly collapsed on the spot. Tears streaming down my face, I gleefully slurped up the remaining juices that were oozing out from inside the bones. I tore free one of the bones. The intense stimulus led me to crumple to the ground, rolling the bone around in my mouth as I did. Chomp, crunch, crunch, munch. When I went to swallow it, the bone got stuck in my throat, and I could no longer breathe. My legs swung around uncontrollably, kicking every which way. But before I knew it, a string had been wrapped around my ankles, stopping them in place. I could no longer move freely. Darth Spider was standing in front of me. Writhing in agony, the exposed bones of my right hand struck the ground. The impact sent violent rippling waves of pain throughout my entire body, and I immediately pissed myself. And I had never opened my eyes again. I opened my eyes in a dim back alley. The scenery was a little different from before. I was walking down the alley while leaning on a male DQN's shoulder. His face was horribly beaten, and he looked like he was about to cry. Okay, this is the last one. The 3 of them, including me, were in an awful condition. Their clothes were soaked with blood, their faces were ridiculously swollen, and they all had a number of chipped teeth. The person who'd done this was probably me. It was the 3 DQNs that had beat me up. And after that happened, they had their torsos torn apart and died. Once again, the man in the Darth Spider costume was there, standing at the end of where we were walking. The guy who was lending me a shoulder shouted at Darth Spider, but with his face as it was, any impact it could have had were pretty much halved. Okay, so it wasn't, I thought it was, Kozue was the one who'd done that. Okay, yeah. One of them grabbed Darth Spider. Holding him by the collar, he lifted him up, then hit his black helmet with his hand. He forced the helmet off. I had already predicted the face that would be under it, and of course, there he was, Suwa Mamoru, looking completely unfazed. He was Hazuki Shino's accomplice, so he was another culprit behind NewGen. Suwa rammed his knee deep into the stomach of the man grabbing him. His agile movement set him far apart from the reckless violence of the DQNs. The ground shook slightly. Behind Suwa there was a presence, hiding in the darkness deep within the narrow alley. Something was there, rumbling with an eerie growl, and, from what I could tell, it wasn't a normal size. Even though we couldn't see it, the fierce bloodlust given off by the monster made all of our hearts seize up. Okay, wasn't expecting that. Obviously it's a delusion, but still. Eventually, with footsteps that sounded like the very ground itself was rumbling, it showed itself. A literal, real-life monster. It was so unbelievably grotesque, nothing like it existed on this earth. Its Its brown, slimy skin glistened, and its gigantic head sat wedged between its shoulders. Its scarlet eyes shone brightly, its mouth tore open on both sides, and its wrists were as thick as giant logs. The bipedal monster came up beside Suwa and opened its gaping maw wide as could be. Its rows of sharp fangs glinted, reflecting the burning glare of the streetlights. Its roar was like a low, dull growl, and yet it was more terrifying than anything I'd ever heard. No beast could have ever hoped to compare. A roar with such ferocity, even the very souls of all who heard it would tremble.
なんだこれ。スパークオーズが好きなんすよ。
Suwa was the only one. Okay, now his Spark Wars thing is like, okay, now he's bringing this out too, the Darth Spider, and now we've got like a monster from Spark Wars. Suwa was the only one who didn't seem bothered by the monster's appearance. On the contrary, he touched the monster's leg in blatant satisfaction, caressing it.
それに出てくるエイリアンス。
Another roar. The monster stepped one step closer to the frozen still trio. We tried to run, but there was no escape. We screamed for help, but there was no one around for kilometers. An overwhelming difference in power, the difference in potential between our species was too great. The three of us were helpless when faced with the beast before us. For the first time in our lives, we experienced fear from the deepest depths of our hearts. When someone is frightened like that, they fall silent, shrink back, and can't move even a single muscle. And so the monster let out a single breath and swung its long, log-like arms. In an instant, as if they were mere rag dolls, the two of them were torn to shreds. Blood and viscera splattered across the alley, steam rising from the remains. The severed corpses of the two men were then viciously tossed aside, skewering them on the handles of a nearby telephone pole.
あとは君だけっすよ。
Sua's gaze pierced through me. I realized that he was the one controlling the alien. I told myself this was a delusion, but there was no point. In the face of absolute terror and overwhelming brutality, I simply slumped to the ground and pissed myself. All I could do after that was look up in a daze at the monster, and then my torso was ripped apart. I felt this in a way no other human could ever possibly experience, and then I stopped breathing. How many times have I died vicariously? 3 times? 1 time? 7 times? 4 times? 2 times? 5 times? Human flesh tasted amazing. It hurt. No more. Darth Spider's outfit was surreal. It had to be a joke. So wait, how many times had I died? Wait, who died? Not me. I wasn't dead. That monster was seriously straight out of a horror movie. But that monster was from, Suwa said, Spark Wars. So what? Human flesh tasted amazing, the bones too. Why was Darth Spider black? Hazuki Shino was sexy, but she was scary. She was crazy, but that was what made her sexy. If Darth Spider were made of bones, what was human flesh? How many times had I died in this prank? Or was it a prank? No, I wasn't dead. I was dead. Death, dead, dead. It was surreal, no more. There were bones. Don't want to die. Black. I died. So kill me. Damn, that's got to be the longest one yet. That's got to be the longest delusion. Inside the rucksack Suwa wore on his back, the port let out a strange mechanical sound. Suwa had long since grown accustomed to hearing it. And because of that sound, he had been able to murder the heart and mind of the gigalomaniac, Nishijo Takumi. He lifted up a heartfelt prayer and gratitude. No matter what, Suwa would have never let Nishijo Takumi get away with what he had done, for the boy had driven Hazuki to suicide. Hazuki was Suwa's childhood friend, whom he had lived with ever since he was born. Suwa recalled what she had told him several years ago, back when he decided to aspire to become a detective, and she to be a nurse.
私、守の子供を産みたい。
Both of their parents were disciples of the Cosmic Church of the Divine Light, and God and the glorious founder had been in their lives since birth. Suwa and Hazuki had both been raised as children of the Divine Light, and their betrothal was the will of the Glorious Founder as well. And so the two of them dutifully obeyed the teachings of the Divine Light, going so far as to offer the life of their child within Hazuki's womb. Even when Hazuki had given her life as a martyr, she had still believed she was doing the right thing. The 7 incidents, colloquially known as the New Generation Madness, Suwa and Hazuki had caused them together. Partway through the incidents, Suwa had grown quite flustered when his senior, Bon Yasuji, pointed out all the inconsistencies in the group dive video. The video Suwa had uploaded to YouTube had been recorded by projecting his memories. However, as it had been a few days since the incident at the time of the recording, his memories had grown far less clear. Oh yeah, because Suwa was surprised by those pictures as well. He had not remembered the exact details of the scene, but since the video would not have been realistic without them, he had expressly gone to Cornelius Tower to review the photos hanging in the lobby. As a result, the video had indeed been made more realistic, but he had failed to choose the correct picture. I love, like, everything's connecting. Like, why was the whole thing with the picture? How did that factor into it? Now we know. He had had no reason to suspect something would look so strikingly different between the tower's completion and the present. However, thanks to the political influence of the Glorious Founder, all of that had been suppressed. It would be unwise to underestimate the power of the Cosmic Church of the Divine Light's Glorious Founder. He had many connections within the government, and he had even managed to weave several of his followers into management positions at the Metropolitan... Oh, so that's why they took him off the case, Bon. They're like, he's getting too close to the truth. No matter how much those like Bon cried out for justice, the natural conclusion to come to was that they would never be able to do a thing to harm him. Suwa's position as a detective, Hazuki's position as a nurse, the support coming from the pressure the Glorious Founder placed on the police and the media, the NOAA system terminals provided by Nozomi Technology. Utilizing all these tools, Suwa and Hazuki had focused solely on killing. As for the reason they had gone to such lengths to continue killing people, it had all been for the sake of breaking Nishijo Takumi. I like how you've got two sides. You've got, like, shoguns trying to break Nishijo, and then you've got, like, these guys also trying to break him. After they forced him to awaken as a gigalomaniac, they would kidnap him and harvest his code sample. Alternatively, by breaking the delusionary Nishijo Takumi, they would lure out the real Nishijo Takumi, capture him, and harvest his code sample. As long as it was Nishijo Takumi, it made no difference if he was real or a copy. That was why Suwa had acted as Nishijo Takumi, using a wheelchair in his impersonation attempt. It had all been foretold by divine prophecy bestowed upon Suwa and Hazuki, one they had to fulfill no matter what sacrifices they would have to make during its course. And now, after sacrificing Hazuki, they had at last been able to overcome the trials given to them by God. The face of the woman who had loved him, and the one whom he had loved in return, rose in Suwa's mind. He gritted his teeth in intense sadness, bearing the utmost grief. As he bathed in sorrow, Suwa approached Nishijo Takumi, whose mind he had just slaughtered. At the edge of the platform, Aoi Sena cradled the head of her father, whom she herself had decapitated. She had fallen to her knees long ago, and now she sat alone atop the train tracks. This one feels, it's called Crying Sky. I'm assuming this is like the worst end. Her chest dyed a deep crimson from her father's blood. She laughed. Drool slovenly seeped out from her mouth. Her eyes were unfocused. Suwa, now having composed himself, glanced at the girl. She's already long gone, he muttered to himself inside his head. In any case, her usefulness had expired, and he felt no need to kill her. I feel like that's going to come back to bite him in the ass. Maybe she'll, just be so overtaken she'll just kill him when he doesn't realize he's got his back turned to her. From the gigalomaniacs who had gathered in Tokyo for Project Noah, there were still 2 whose code samples had yet to be harvested. This number excluded Kusunoki Yua, for she was an irregularity that had never been suspected of being a gigalomaniac. The remaining targets were Nishijo Takumi and Orihara Kozoe. It had to be the infallible guidance of the divine light that the 2 of them had fallen right into Suwa's hands. In the same location, even. He had now received total proof his actions had always been proper and just. For this, he held endless gratitude toward heaven and the glorious founder. Upon reaching Takumi, he dropped to his knees, grabbed the limp boy's upper arms, and attempted to forcibly pull him to his feet. But Takumi had already gone hollow. He was no longer capable of standing. His heart and mind had perished completely. Serves him right. With a snort, Suwa began to walk away, dragging Takumi by the arms along with him. Kozupi was shouting something, sounded painful, like she was hurting, maybe having fun. I blinked my eyes. Where's Kozupi? She was hanging from some weird cross art. Rimi was at her feet. She's lying on the ground tied up round and round. Kozupi was weird. Her clothes were torn a lot. They were in pieces, and there were creepy crawling. Creepy crawling? What was? Her shell, her skin, her cheeks, her neck, and her arms, and around her belly button and up her thighs, and creepy crawly, squishy wishy. Lots of thingies were wiggling under Kozupi's skin. I like how we know that he's gone insane when he starts to talk like Kozupi. Not 1, 10 thingies, 20 thingies, maybe 30 thingies. I think they're parasites, yucky little caterpillars. I'm guessing that's her fear, is bugs. Kozupi shaky shakes her head around. Her eyes went everywhere. Lots of drool, dribbly drips, dribble. Her face looked super stupid, looked funny. She was also wearing a thingy on her head. It had lots of cords coming out of it, like a toy, like a super duper Power Rangers toy set or something.
楽しいことでもあったのですか？西条匠。
An old guy I'd never seen before. Who?
なるほど。無意識に折原梢と妄想をシンクロさせているのですか。随分と物好きですね。そんなに焦らずとも、彼女の次は君にたっぷりとあの拷問を受けさせてあげますよ。
Who's next? Me? I didn't want that. Who's next? Me? No, I didn't want that. Who's next? Me? I didn't want that. I didn't want any suffering. I didn't want any pain.
タク、あなたなら止められる。今なら止められる。あなたなら。
My wrist should have been tied behind my back, but suddenly, as if it had a will of its own, the cord loosened and fell to the floor. Tied up and lying on the ground, Rimi turned just her gaze to me. Her eyes pleaded with me. A gigantic device sat in the center of the dome-shaped room, giving off an eerie hum. That is Noah 2. Destroy it. Rimi's eyes asked this of me. A tall, intellectual-looking man, Narose, had his back turned to me, and he was watching Kozupi's torture with an earnest look on his face. He hadn't noticed me moving. There was no one else around, not even Suwa. I could do it now. I was the only one who could. But I was scared. What if Narose caught me? What if I failed? When I thought these things, my body began to tremble. There was something seriously wrong with this game, forcing the fate of the world onto someone like me. But I had to do it. That realization and resolve came to me with surprising ease. Maybe I'd grown stronger. Yeah, that was it. I was strong. I was super strong now. I stood up, slowly. Narose still hadn't noticed. For a final boss, he was a total dumbass. Was it that fun watching Kozupi suffering? Raw disgust flowed through me. I gritted my teeth. Come forth, D-Sword. Ripples appeared in the open air, and a blue light burst forth. I grasped it, felt it. Neither cold nor hot, neither hard nor soft. I drew it from the Dirac Sea, and a long grand sword settled in my hand.
Nani?
He finally noticed me, but it was too late. I reel-booted my D-Sword. I sent particles flying into everyone's dead spots. I had done it completely unconsciously. The method that I'd used, or how it worked, didn't matter to me. I just had a delusion, and it had come to be. I gripped the hilt of my D-Sword with both hands. Its glow transformed from blue to red. Narose stared at me in disbelief. He was shrinking back. I'd won. I grinned from ear to ear. Have you, though? Be careful. Raised my sword, and formed a delusion. This was a sword of light. It possessed incredible power, power to cut through the very air itself. If I called forth all of its power and swung the blade, it could reduce anything on this earth to rubble.
くらえこれが
I couldn't come up with a name for my special attack on the spot, so I just gave up on shouting something out. Besides, this wasn't some shonen manga. I took the power I'd stored in my D-sword through my delusions and unleashed it all toward Noah 2. We know that Noah 2, it can move around, right? So did he actually destroy it? No? Sounded like it, but who knows? Oh, okay. This one, it's funny. They spent so much time having me be tortured through being like taking the place of the people who were murdered. So it feels like they're kind of speed running the actual like ending. And they're like, oh shit, we spent so much time on that. Okay, just the people know what's gonna happen. It's okay, just move along. 2 months later. The winter sky was barely blue, but in exchange, unlike the summer sky, it was crisp, cool, and carried an almost translucent aura. It was morning. A few minutes ago, my eyes had opened to the sound of my alarm clock. And now, as I brushed my teeth, my gaze shifted up toward the sky. It had been 2 months since that insanity. Shibuya was still in the midst of its reconstruction efforts. Yeah, because we didn't get to see the after effects of what happened. We just saw, like, directly what happened after the earthquake. Ever since the new year had first kicked off, little by little, Shibuya had slowly been returning to its noisy, gaudy-ass self. What if we learn that all of this is just a delusion? Like, it turns out that Norose won. Somehow we survived, and this is just like, we're living in what we think is the real world, but it's not. A voice called my name. When I turned around, I saw Rimi making her way up the stairs. I hadn't seen her in her school uniform since that day. Rimi gave me a big smile and took a salute-like pose.
Bishi, ohayo. Asagohan, isoide tsukuru ne.
Rimi was holding a bag from the convenience store. Inside were some eggs, milk, and white bread. Standing in front of the sink, she cheerfully started making preparations. Yeah, this seems a little bit too good to be true. I don't know. For the past 2 months, Rimi had made it a point to come to my base pretty much every morning to cook me breakfast. Apparently, she hadn't done much cooking before she'd met me, so this doubled as practice for her. I wanted to tell her not to use me as her guinea pig, but just being able to eat a girl's home cooking at all made me incredibly happy, so I just bit my tongue and put up with it. Ever since the earthquake, Sume Academy had been closed down, but it was finally reopening today. I plan to use this opportunity to leave behind my semi-shut-in lifestyle, starting by seriously attending school. As she said this, Rimi cracked open an egg. Hey, look it's all clean. Look at this character development, if this is real. As you'd expect, it wasn't exactly feasible to eat outside right in the middle of winter. You'd freeze your ass off. To avoid that, Rimi carried inside the 2 servings of toast and scrambled eggs she'd made for us, and set them down on the small table beside each other. And once our hands were free, the 2 of us sat next to each other on the sofa.
Itadakimasu.
After putting my hands together, I reached for the butter sitting at the edge of the table. However, Rimi had done the same thing at almost the same time, and our fingertips brushed up against each other atop the container of butter. What a rom-com ass plot point. Smiling wryly at that in my head, my eyes soon met with those of Rimi's, who was sitting extremely close to me, and my heart began to pound. Rimi didn't take her eyes off of me, nor did she pull back her hand. Both of us had gone rigid, staring at each other as our fingers touched. Rimi entwined her fingers with my own. Okay, yeah, this is not real, right? Come on. Her eyes softly closed, and then she ever so slightly lifted her face. Naturally, I held Rimi's hand in return. I slowly neared her lips. Flustered, I jumped away from Rimi. Yeah, of course this is a delusion because Nanami's got her hand back. When I looked at the door, I saw Nanami standing there. I had no idea when she'd shown up. All I'd known was that her arms were crossed and she had a pretty exasperated look on her face.
ななみ、心臓に悪いことするなよ。
はあ、お兄とリミさんってほんと仲いいね。焼けちゃうな。ねえねえ、実際のところどこまで行ったの？どこまでって？またまたとぼけてないで教えてよ、リミさん。
Seemed like Nanami had selected Rimi as her next target. Barging into my room, she pulled aside my computer chair and sat down in front of Rimi.
キスは当然したとして、その先は？
Like, this is obviously... This is like an alternate world where everything was just fine after like, of course it's not going to be like this. I'd be shocked if it turns out that this is all real, but the fact that Nanami has her hand back. Unless we all created a mutual delusion that Nanami got her hand back.
ちょっと、からかわないでよ。いいじゃん、教えて。教えない。じゃあ鬼、教えてよ。どこまで行ったか。
Also, what kind of sister would talk like this to their brother? I'm not telling you. Besides, we haven't even kissed yet. Why did you have to remind me? God, I'm such an idiot. I've had so many chances before now. I hate myself. At this rate, it felt like I'd never lose my V card. Starting to get depressed at how much of a loser I was, I gulped down some milk.
リミさんがのんびりしてるなら、ナナが鬼を奪っちゃうかな。
Fuck this. Like, come on. Practically a gallon of milk spurted from my mouth. This is just like that slice of life, like cute little, like, what seems like it's gonna be an eroge, the little sister being like, I love you, big bro.
鬼、きったな。
お前。
冗談だよ。本気にされても困っちゃうってば。
Could we please stop trying to give me a heart attack? Side by side, the three of us walked to school together. Rimi was humming that Phantasm song again. Passing through the center of Shoto Park, we took my usual shortcut. You could still see a few traces of the earthquake around the park. For example, part of the stone wall circling the pond was still broken. Even then, though, it was still way better off than the rest of Shibuya, especially when compared to the sad state of the center of it.
おはようございます。
Yua was sitting on the bench. Turning toward us, she put on a gentle smile and bowed her head.
西条くん、昨日はとても楽しかったです。昨日？
ユアと一緒に秋葉原まで買い物に行ったんだ。
あ、わかった。お人形さんでしょう。
フィギュアと言えよ。
Well, it was true we'd gone to buy figures.
新しいセイラちゃん。早速部屋に飾りました。私も行きたかったな。
リミってフィギュアに興味あるの？
When I asked that, Rimi gave a slightly sheepish smile.
っていうか、タクの好きなもの、私も好きになりたいし。わあ、大胆発言。だったら、今度一緒に買いに行きましょう。本当？ありがとうございます。
Yua and Rimi had really hit it off. Yua and Nanami's classes were both in different buildings, so we said our goodbyes at the school entrance. As I changed into my indoor shoes, someone came up from behind me and blew into my ear. I shuddered, goosebumps springing up all over me, jumped away and spun around. There stood Ayase wearing a narrow smile.
おはよう、たくみ。
おはよう。
おはよう、あやちゃん。あやちゃん。
Ayase tilted her head when she heard Rimi call her that.
初めてよ。そんな呼び方をされたのは悪くないわ。でしょ？ファンタズムのライブがあるの。あさって。
She abruptly changed the subject. Unsurprisingly, Ayase was as hard to get a read on as ever.
よかったら来て。
僕に言ってるの？
匠に言ってるのよ。
Of course, all the girls want to hang out with him. And also, the thing is, too, Takumi, he's not speaking, like, stuttering anymore. He's speaking very confidently. This is, like, his ideal world.
それと、リミも。あ、本当？絶対行くね。
Phantasm had broken up a while back, but I'd heard they'd had a sudden revival after the new year started up. I didn't know where the change of heart had come from, but what I did know was I wanted to hear more of Ayase's singing.
でも、 匠は渡さないわ。
I didn't really know what was up with the but Ayase reached out and softly caressed my cheek, as if she were showing Rimi her place.
じゃあね、匠。
With a bewitching smile, she climbed the stairs in front of us. In a daze, I watched her go without the faintest clue of what had happened.
たく、鼻の下伸びてる。
え？あ、
I quickly shot a hand up to my mouth.
冗談。
When we reached the outside of our classroom, Kozupi came racing down the hallway, her smile stretching from ear to ear. But before she could make it to us, she suddenly crashed into a boy coming out of the classroom and landed flat on her butt. Her eyes swimming with tears, she apologized to the boy, then finally managed to get over to us.
怪我はない？廊下を走っちゃダメだよ、コズピ。ほにゃ。
Kozupi started fidgeting. She then looked up at me from below.
匠さんに早く教えたかったのら。
教えるって何を？
ね。
Kozupi pointed in the direction she had just come running from. When I looked closer, I saw Senna standing there, leaning against the wall. Her arms were crossed, and she had a fairly sullen expression plastered on her face.
セナさん、退院したんだ。
Senna had been hospitalized over the past 2 months. Suwa's psychological attack had put her out of commission for a long time. Senna raised her head, then slowly began making her way toward us. She was just as scary as ever. She always carried a certain aura, one that gave off the impression that she would suddenly slap you even if you hadn't done anything wrong. I had gone to visit Senna in the hospital twice a week, but no matter how many times I tried to make conversation, she'd never said so much as a single word. The awkwardness had been torture. Could it be that she just hated me that much? I didn't really know how to handle her. A fierce tension hung in the air between us. Then again, it would have been more accurate to say that only I was freaked out. She was fine.
というわけで、今日は学校が終わったら退院のお祝いをしよしよ。
Kozupi was the one showing any sort of enthusiasm. Well, I mean, a party with this kind of atmosphere would be pretty shitty.
おい、西条。
That was when Senna finally opened her mouth. I shrank back, refusing to meet her
これ
eyes.
を。
Senna held something out to me. It was a small stick with the word win written on it.
あ、ガルガリ君の当たり棒なのら。
Bewildered, I accepted it. Senna quickly looked the other
お
way.
前に言いたいことがある。
なんでしょう。
Was it just my imagination, or had Senna's cheeks turned pink?
お前のことが。
え？
おぴ？
Her sudden confession left not just me, but Rimi and Kozupi all speechless. For a moment, I thought she was just teasing me, but Senna wasn't the type of character to make those kinds of jokes. Which meant, are you serious?
何度もお見舞いに来てくれて嬉しかったんだ。言わせるな、このバカが。
She had gone all dare, then straight back to Sun mode, all on her own. Wait, go back a little. This was all way too sudden. Way behind schedule, Rimi let out a cry in surprise. Kozupi, likely still processing, had her eyes open wide.
なんだ、先畑。異論があるのか。ありまくりだよ。そんな、
Are these girls all just gonna fight each other for me? Rimi and Kozupi were utterly baffled, but the most bewildered one of all was me. I would have never expected something so insane. Without any idea of how in the hell I was supposed to react, I gazed up at the clear sky sitting outside the window. Somehow, even though the semester had only just started, it was already quite the eventful day. I wonder, will every day be like this from now on? Will these fun, peaceful times go on forever? I sure hope so. I wished for it from the bottom of my heart. Suddenly, I saw the reflection of my face in the window. And the reflection I saw, is it going to be like old wrinkly me? Wasn't me, because it was covered in wrinkles, yep. Ah, yep, of course. Color and light disappeared. I was hugging my knees close to me in a space dyed pitch black. In front of my eyes was the only light source around. It was like a monitor. It was like a window. It was like a picture frame. Inside it, Rimi, Senna, and Kozapi were chatting happily about something, but I couldn't hear their voices. I stared at it. My emotions were completely inactive, or maybe my heart was simply dead. He's like, I want to be part of that game. That game looks fun. I then realized I had been watching my own delusions, a 2D world where I had escaped into, a perfect illusion. How long had it all been a delusion?
最初からですよ。
I looked behind me where Norose stood tall, but with how dark it was, I could only see his feet.
諏訪君に心を殺されたではありませんか。
So ever since he'd done that, I'd been in a delusion the entire
君
time.
のコードサンプルは採取できました。もう用済みですから、いつでも塵に帰ってもらって結構です。
ああ。
I felt nothing. My heart was dead after all, so I shouldn't have felt anything. And yet a single tear trickled down my cheek. In the end, I'd gone right back to being a loser. I'd run away from the painful reality.
最後に幸せな夢を見られてよかったですね。
Even to the very end, I'd been a completely worthless human being. I'm sorry, Rimi. I apologized, but I didn't really understand why I had to anymore. I didn't feel any guilt. And so I decided to return to my delusion from earlier. Hopefully someone would kill me one of these days. So until then, I wanted to fully immerse myself in the happiness that came from the world I'd escaped to. Okay, so is this the same? When had the rain begun to fall? Or perhaps this rain had been brought into the world by Noah too? The gaze rained down from the sky. The stare pierced through the thick pitch-black rain clouds and poured down on me like rain. It's too late for him now. Okay, this is different, yeah. I whispered in my heart to the owner of the gaze. I didn't feel the chill of the rain. Instead, the droplets on my cheeks felt warm to me. It was the first time I'd ever thought of rain as being warm. Perhaps it was the fault of the spine-chilling cold enveloping the dome where Noah too was. Reflected in my eyes was a ruined city. Reflected in my eyes was despair. Reflected in my eyes was death. Reflected in my eyes was nothingness. Not a soul was here. Not a soul was moving. Not a soul was left alive. The only thing I could hear was the sound of the rain continuing to pour. The arc had already been set into motion. We had been unable to stop it. And now the future held nothing but despair. At this rate, everything, both the living and the dead, would it all be gently embraced and washed away? I heard him whisper all of this inside his heart. His heart, it's so beautiful. I walked to the figure lying limp in the rubble. It was my fault he had ended up like this. Oh, okay, interesting. So, okay, this is from Rimi's point of view. If I had done better, he wouldn't have gotten involved at all. Feelings of guilt tortured me. I blamed myself. Forgive me. I'll give you peace now. How he had been born was far too sad. How he was going to die was far too sad. A heart so timid, so fragile. It was like it was made of glass. Glass so pure it had shattered its owner to pieces. At the very least, I didn't want him to suffer in the end. Lying on the ground, he looked up to me with vacant eyes. I pushed aside my emotions. Though I was looking at him, I tried to distance myself in an attempt to stave off my tears. If you and I were the only ones left in the world, if we stared into each other's eyes like this for all eternity. So that makes me think, is this ending is pretty much the same. Does that mean the first ending I got was all that stuff that happened to him a delusion as well? Would my world be reduced to what's reflected in your eyes? Would your world be reduced to what's reflected in my eyes? The only thing reflected in my eyes was him. The only thing reflected in his eyes was me. When I thought of it that way, the world immediately seemed so much smaller. At least in the time you have left, I will become your world. Whether the world is painful, whether the world is agonizing, or whether the world is sorrowful, I'll make it so you no longer have to see it anymore. Gathering my resolve, I let out a whisper. Lowering my head, I spread my arms wide, almost as if I were preparing to take off, to soar above the rain clouds. As if I were trying to catch all the falling
あな
rain.
たを見つめる妄想。
Okay. So it does feel like, yeah, this is just the alternate side from Rimi's point of view, so that makes me think the first ending we got, that was all a delusion. As I said, like, ever since Suwa tortured me, it's all been a delusion. Feathers of light danced about. They served as a gift handed down from the sky, a gift for his funeral. Because this is happening the exact same way. So in the first one, I assumed that I had killed Suwa, I had managed to stop Noah too, I saved the world, but maybe in reality I didn't do any of that. And this ending here is just showing, like, my realization that I didn't actually do anything. I slowly knelt to the ground right before his collapsed body. I'll cry if I see your eyes. I'm sorry, I can't look at them. I softly embraced his head in my arms. His body was devoid of all strength, as if he were fully prepared for death.
辛いよね。ごめん。ごめんね。今、楽にしてあげるからね。
His demeanor told me that I wasn't just doing this for my own sake. He has a very peaceful smile on his face. But that smile was so sad. Even though I'd held it all in all this time, tears began to well up. I'd held them back because I didn't ever want him to see those tears. He'd finally found peace, and I didn't want to worry him any further. I kissed him on the lips. They were cold, desiccated, and laden with seemingly endless sorrow. And yet, when I kissed him, his trembling ceased. I was overjoyed to know that my warmth was of some use to him. If I drew back from his lips, he would see my teary face. If I drew back from his lips, I would want to kiss him again. If I drew back from his lips, I'd be struck with such selfish feelings, I wouldn't be able to kill him anymore. My lips still enveloping his, I sank my D-sword into his chest. The sensation of it tearing through his skin, boring into his flesh, weaving through his bones, and slowly sinking through to the center of his body. It all passed through the sword and into my hands. I'm so sorry. You can sleep for as long as you want to now. Goodbye. Alright, now we get to see the after effects of, like, what happened. Was the sky blurring because of the rain? Because of my tears? His body was enveloped by countless particles of light, and he slowly began to disappear. I reached my hand towards the sky. Somebody, please tell me. Just where could that sky of ours have gone? Alright, there we go. Second ending now. So I liked that. I liked that we got a little bit more information, not a whole heck of a lot. It was very similar to the first one, probably because it was just like an alternate point of view. I do like that it seems to have given like some context about, like, we thought that he went all shonen hero, managed to take out Noah too and kill Suwa and kill Narose, but what's mostly happened was Suwa just basically broke me from the beginning when we encountered each other, and everything I thought I had done after that was a delusion, and this one was just me coming to that realization of, like, oh, I didn't do any of that. Okay, so there we go, guys. That is the second ending. So obviously we're going to try and get the next one in the next episode. Whether I'm going to be able to contain it all into one episode, we will see about that. This one didn't seem to have very many changes. It pretty much played through the same up until chapter 10 with a couple of little insights into, like, Suwa and the nurse's relationship. That was really the only new information we had gotten. And just some, like, points of view from Shogun and him setting everything up. But yeah, I'm assuming hopefully the next endings we will get more new content. But we'll wait and see. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next one. Until then, bye. Special shoutouts to my top tier patrons: Revealing Storm, Lynn's VA, Kenju Storm, Icognito, and Bad Cat.